She stood outside the door, perfectly still, listening to the man she was supposed to marry explain why she was acceptable enough. Not loved, not chosen, just convenient. The words didn't break her. They woke her. By dawn, Evelyn Carter would vanish from the estate that had shaped her entire existence, carrying nothing but resolve and the terrifying freedom of starting over. This is the story of a woman who walked away from everything she was promised to find something worth keeping. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The estate looked different at night. Evelyn had walked these hallways 1,000 times, knew every creak in the floorboards, every place where moonlight cut through the tall windows and pooled on the carpet. But tonight, past midnight, with most of the household asleep, the silence felt heavier, more final. She wasn't supposed to be awake. Ladies didn't wander at this hour. They slept soundly in their rooms, trusting the world would still be there in the morning, orderly and predictable. But Evelyn had never been good at sleep. Her mind moved too fast, circling problems she wasn't allowed to solve, questions she wasn't supposed to ask. Tonight, she'd given up on rest entirely. She'd put on her dressing gown and slippers, thinking maybe a walk to the library would help. A book. Something to quiet the restlessness that had been building in her chest for weeks now, ever since the engagement had been formally announced. She should have been happy. Everyone said so. "You'll be a duchess," her mother had whispered, gripping her hands too tightly. "Do you understand what that means? Security, respect, everything we've worked for." Evelyn had nodded, smiled, said the right things. But happiness felt like something that happened to other people. The kind of women who laughed easily, who took up space without apologizing for it. Evelyn had learned early that her value lay in being unobtrusive, pleasant, the kind of person you could forget was in the room until you needed something from her. She'd perfected that role. And now it was paying off, wasn't it? A future duchess. Most women would kill for this opportunity. So why did it feel like drowning? The library was on the far side of the West Wing, past the drawing rooms and her fiancé's study. She'd nearly made it when she heard voices, low, male, coming from behind a door that had been left slightly ajar. She should have kept walking, should have pretended she'd heard nothing, but she recognized one of the voices. Edmund, the Duke of Thornhill, her future husband. Evelyn stopped. "I still don't understand the rush," another man was saying. She didn't recognize this voice, probably one of Edmund's friends from London. "You've avoided marriage for years. Why now? Why her?" There was a pause. The sound of liquid being poured. Whiskey, probably. "Because it's time," Edmund said finally. His voice had that clipped, efficient tone he used when discussing business. "I need an heir. The estate needs stability. And Miss Carter is suitable." Suitable. The word landed like a stone in her stomach. "Suitable?" The friend laughed. "Christ, Edmund, you make her sound like a piece of furniture. What about affection? Companionship?" "Those are luxuries," Edmund replied. "I'm choosing a wife, not a mistress. Miss Carter is well-bred, educated enough to manage a household, and too sensible to cause drama. She understands what's expected of her." "You mean she won't complain?" "Precisely." Another pause. Evelyn's hand had found the wall, steadying herself. "And she's acceptable to look at," Edmund continued, almost as an afterthought. "Not beautiful, but not unpleasant. She won't embarrass me at social functions. More importantly, her family is desperate enough that they won't make difficult demands. The dowry is modest, but I don't need her money. I need her compliance." The friend made a sound, half laugh, half sigh. "Well, at least you're honest about it. Most men pretend there's romance involved." "Romance is for poets and fools," Edmund said. "I'm building a legacy. Miss Carter will provide heirs, manage the household, and stay out of my way. That's all I require." "And what does she get?" "A title, security, the chance to live in comfort for the rest of her life. Most women would consider that more than fair." "Most women aren't people to you, are they?" Edmund didn't answer that, just said, "Pour me another." Evelyn didn't remember moving. One moment she was frozen outside that door, and the next she was back in her room, sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at nothing. Suitable, acceptable to look at, too sensible to cause drama. The words kept circling, each one sharper than the last. She'd known, hadn't she? On some level, she'd always known that Edmund didn't love her. Love hadn't been part of the arrangement. This was about family, position, duty, all the things she'd been raised to value above personal happiness. But hearing it said out loud, in that casual, dismissive tone, hearing herself reduced to a list of practical attributes, like a horse being evaluated for purchase. Something cracked open inside her chest. Not anger. Not yet. Just clarity. This was her future. This was what she'd agreed to. A life of being suitable, of staying out of the way, of providing heirs and managing household accounts, and never ever being seen as fully human. And the worst part? Everyone would tell her she was lucky. Evelyn stood, walked to her wardrobe, opened it. Rows of dresses stared back at her. All carefully chosen, all perfectly appropriate. Pale colors, modest necklines. Nothing too bold, nothing that drew attention. Her entire wardrobe was an exercise in being inoffensive. She reached past them, to the back of the wardrobe, where she kept the small wooden box her grandmother had given her years ago. Inside, 200 pounds. Money her grandmother had left specifically to her, separate from the family finances. For emergencies, the note had said, use it wisely. Evelyn had never touched it, never needed to. Her life had been mapped out since birth, school, society, marriage, no emergencies, no choices. She pulled the box out, opened it. The bills were still there, carefully preserved. 200 pounds. It wasn't a fortune, but it was something. It was hers. The thought came suddenly, fully formed. I could leave. She sat back down, the box in her lap, her heart hammering. Leave. Just go. Walk out that door and never come back. The idea was insane. Impossible. Women didn't just leave, not women like her, from families like hers. There were expectations, obligations, consequences. But as she sat there in the dark, listening to the estate settle around her, another thought pushed through. What if I do it anyway? The decision, once made, felt less like courage and more like inevitability. Evelyn didn't sleep. She sat at her small writing desk and made a list, because that's what you did when facing the impossible. You broke it into manageable pieces. What I need, practical clothing. The money from grandmother's box. A traveling bag, small enough to carry alone. Food for 2 days. A story, in case anyone stops me. What I'm leaving. Everything else. It looked absurd, written out like that. 23 years of life reduced to 2 short lists. But it also looked possible. The household wouldn't wake for hours. The servants started their day before dawn, but even they wouldn't be moving around for another 2 hours at least. If she left now, quietly, carefully, she could be miles away before anyone noticed. And then what? Evelyn pushed that question aside. She'd figure it out, one step at a time. She changed out of her nightgown, choosing the most practical dress she owned. A simple gray wool, sturdy and warm. She added her warmest cloak, good walking boots, gloves, pulled her hair back into a tight braid. Looking at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked plain, forgettable, perfect. The money went into a small leather pouch she could wear under her dress. The bag, a modest travel satchel she'd used years ago for weekend visits, held a spare dress, undergarments, toiletries, and what food she could gather from her room without raising suspicion. 2 apples, a half loaf of bread she'd saved from dinner, some cheese wrapped in cloth. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start. She picked up the last item, a small, worn book of poetry her grandmother had given her. Completely impractical, but it had been a gift given with love, and Evelyn couldn't bring herself to leave it behind. Into the bag it went. Then she sat down and wrote 3 letters. The first was to her mother, short, apologetic, firm. I cannot marry the Duke of Thornhill. Please don't look for me. I'm sorry. I hope someday you'll understand. The second was to Edmund, even shorter. I release you from our engagement. You deserve someone more suitable. The third was to her younger sister, Caroline. This one was harder. Caroline was only 17, still naive enough to believe in fairy tales and happy endings. What would she think when she woke to find Evelyn gone? Be braver than I was, Evelyn wrote. Don't let them make you small. She sealed the letters, left them on her desk where they'd be found. And then, carrying nothing but a single bag and the weight of her own decision, Evelyn Carter walked out of her room, down the silent hallway, through the servants' entrance at the back of the house, and into the cold, pre-dawn darkness. She didn't look back. So, the countryside at night was a different world. Evelyn had spent her entire life on estates, Manicured grounds, carefully maintained gardens, landscapes designed for beauty and control. But out here, beyond the iron gates and sculpted hedges, nature didn't care about order. The road was rough, unpaved in places, winding through fields that stretched dark and endless under a sky just beginning to pale at the edges. The air was cold enough to burn her lungs, and within 20 minutes her feet ached despite the good boots. But she kept walking. At first, every sound made her flinch. The rustle of wind through bare trees, the distant call of some night bird, the crunch of her own footsteps on gravel. She kept expecting to hear horses behind her, voices calling her name, someone coming to drag her back to the life she'd escaped. But the road stayed empty. By the time the sun rose, a thin gray light that did nothing to warm the air, Evelyn had put maybe 5 miles between herself and the estate. Not far enough. Not nearly far enough, but it was a start. She stopped to rest beneath a cluster of trees, her legs trembling from exertion and adrenaline. The bread was stale, the cheese hard, but she forced herself to eat slowly, rationing. She had no idea when she'd find more food or where she was even going. A market town, maybe. Somewhere large enough that a single woman traveling alone wouldn't draw immediate suspicion. Somewhere she could find work. Work. The word felt foreign. Ladies didn't work. They managed households, supervised servants, organized social events, but they didn't work. Not for money, not for survival. Evelyn had no idea what she was qualified to do. She could read and write, well, actually, better than most. She could do mathematics, keep accounts, speak French passably well. She could play the piano, embroider, make polite conversation about nothing. None of that felt particularly useful for surviving alone. But she'd figure it out. She had to. The day stretched long and cold. Evelyn walked until her feet were numb and her back ached from the weight of the bag. She passed a few other travelers, a farmer with a cart, 2 men on horseback who barely glanced at her. But no one stopped. No one asked questions. In her plain gray dress, with her head down and her pace steady, she was invisible. Just another person on the road, unremarkable and forgettable. For the first time in her life, Evelyn was grateful to be ordinary. By late afternoon, she spotted a village in the distance, a cluster of buildings, smoke rising from chimneys, the welcome sight of civilization. Her entire body hurt, and she was so tired she could barely think straight, but relief pushed her forward. The village was small, maybe 30 buildings total, arranged around a central square with a church at one end and what looked like an inn at the other. People moved through the streets, women carrying baskets, children chasing each other, men standing in small groups talking. Normal life. The kind Evelyn had observed from a distance but never really participated in. She headed for the inn, her stomach twisting with anxiety. This was the first real test. Could she pass as someone ordinary? Could she blend in? The inn was called the Silver Heart, according to the weathered sign hanging above the door. Inside it was warm and crowded, smelling of bread and ale and unwashed bodies. Evelyn paused just inside the entrance, momentarily overwhelmed. "Help you, miss." A woman stood behind the bar, middle-aged, sturdy, with sharp eyes that took in everything at once. The innkeeper, probably. Evelyn stepped forward, forcing her voice steady. "I'm looking for a room, just for tonight." "Traveling alone?" The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes, I'm visiting family nearby." The lie came easier than expected. "But I missed the last coach and need somewhere to stay until morning." The woman studied her for a long moment. Evelyn kept her expression neutral, pleasant, unthreatening. Finally, the woman nodded. 3 shillings for the night. That includes breakfast." 3 shillings. Evelyn had no idea if that was expensive or reasonable, but she pulled out her coin purse and counted out the money carefully. The woman pocketed it. "Rooms upstairs, second door on the right. There's a wash basin and clean linens. Supper's at 6 if you want it. Costs extra." "Thank you." Evelyn climbed the narrow stairs, found the room, tiny, barely large enough for the bed and a small table, but clean, and finally let herself collapse onto the mattress. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. For the first time since leaving, the reality of what she'd done crashed over her. She was alone, truly alone. No family, no friends, no one who knew where she was or cared what happened to her. The freedom was terrifying. But lying there in that small, plain room, listening to the sounds of the inn around her, people talking, laughing, living their ordinary lives, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years. Possibility. She stayed in the village for 3 days, not because she planned to, but because leaving meant deciding where to go next, and Evelyn wasn't ready to make that decision yet. So she paid for another night, and then another, telling the innkeeper, Mrs. Brennan, she'd learned, that her family business was taking longer than expected. Mrs. Brennan didn't question it. Evelyn paid on time, caused no trouble, and kept to herself. That seemed to be enough. During the day, Evelyn walked through the village observing, watching how people interacted, what they wore, how they spoke. She was learning a new language, the language of ordinary life. The village had a general store, a blacksmith, a dressmaker, a small schoolhouse. Most people seemed to know each other, their lives interconnected in ways Evelyn had never experienced. They called out greetings across the street, stopped to share gossip, helped each other with casual ease. It looked nice. Complicated, probably. Small towns always had their dramas, but real in a way her old life had never been. On the third day, Evelyn was sitting in the common room of the inn, eating breakfast and trying to decide what to do next, when a commotion at the door drew everyone's attention. A man stumbled in, well-dressed but disheveled, his face flushed with anger or drink or both. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice too loud for the small space. "Where's the girl who's been staying here?" Evelyn's blood went cold. Mrs. Brennan stepped forward, her expression wary. "I've got several guests, sir. You'll have to be more specific." "Young woman, traveling alone? Been here 3 days? Don't play stupid with me." Evelyn set down her fork carefully, her mind racing. She could run, slip out the back before he saw her. But where would she go? And what if... The man turned, scanning the room, and his eyes locked on her. "There you are." But it wasn't Edmund. Relief and confusion hit simultaneously. The man crossed the room in 3 strides, towering over her table. Up close, he was younger than she'd thought, maybe 30, with the kind of face that might have been handsome if it wasn't twisted with anger. "You're the one," he said. "The one who's been teaching my sister mathematics." Evelyn blinked. What? Don't play innocent. Emily came home yesterday going on and on about some woman at the inn who helped her with her schoolwork. Told her she was smart enough for anything." He spat the words like they were poison. "What the hell do you think you're doing, filling her head with nonsense?" Understanding clicked into place. 2 days ago, Evelyn had been sitting outside the inn when a young girl, maybe 12, had walked past, crying over a slate covered in mathematics problems. Without thinking, Evelyn had stopped her, looked at the problems, and spent 20 minutes explaining them until the girl understood. It had felt good, useful. Like maybe all those years of education hadn't been completely wasted. She hadn't realized it would cause trouble. "I was just helping her with her homework," Evelyn said, keeping her voice calm. She was struggling with, she doesn't need help. She needs to focus on things that matter. Cooking, sewing, running a household. Not filling her head with ideas that'll make her miserable when she realizes she can't have them. Around the room, other patrons had stopped eating, watching the confrontation. Mrs. Brennan had moved closer, her hand resting on something under the bar. Probably a cudgel. Evelyn looked up at the angry man, Emily's brother, apparently, and felt something shift inside her. She could apologize. Make herself small. Assure him she'd never speak to his sister again. That's what the old Evelyn would have done. But the old Evelyn was gone, wasn't she? Left behind in that estate, in that life where being suitable meant being silent. "Your sister is intelligent," Evelyn said clearly. "She understood those problems in minutes once they were explained properly. That kind of mind deserves to be developed, not wasted." His face darkened. "How dare you?" "I dare because it's true." She stood, and maybe it was the exhaustion or the adrenaline or the 3 days of being nobody, but she didn't stop. And if you cared more about her future than your own convenience, you'd see that. The silence in the inn was absolute. The man stared at her, his fists clenched. For a moment, Evelyn thought he might actually hit her. Then Mrs. Brennan's voice cut through the tension. "That's enough, Thomas Fletcher. You've said your piece. Time to go." Thomas Fletcher looked from Evelyn to Mrs. Brennan and back again. His jaw worked, like he was chewing on words too angry to speak. Finally, he spat at Evelyn's feet, a gesture of contempt, and stalked out. The door slammed behind him. Slowly, conversation resumed around the room, but Evelyn could feel eyes on her, people reassessing who she was. Mrs. Brennan approached, her expression unreadable. "That was foolish." "I know. Thomas Fletcher's got a temper and a long memory." "I know that too." Mrs. Brennan studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she smiled, small but genuine. But you weren't wrong. Emily is bright, wasted on that family. She paused. You looking for work? Evelyn blinked. What? Work. You're educated, well-spoken, and apparently not afraid of angry fools. I know someone who might have use for that. Mrs. Brennan wiped down the bar, casual. The Whitmore house. About 2 miles east. They need a governess for their children. Pays decent, room and board included. I could put in a word. A governess. It wasn't Duchess. Wasn't the life she'd been raised for, but it was something real, something hers. Yes, Evelyn said, please. Mrs. Brennan nodded. I'll send word this afternoon. They'll probably want to interview you tomorrow. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Mrs. Whitmore's particular. But if you can stand up to Thomas Fletcher, you can probably handle her. That night, lying in her small rented room, Evelyn thought about the man she'd left behind. Edmund, with his talk of suitable wives and convenient arrangements. She wondered if he'd even noticed she was gone yet, or if her absence was just a minor inconvenience in his carefully ordered life. She wondered if her mother had read the letter, if Caroline had cried. The guilt was there, sharp and real. She'd hurt people, disappointed them, failed every expectation they'd had, but she'd also stood in an inn and spoken her mind and walked away intact. That had to count for something. The Whitmore house wasn't an estate, nothing like the sprawling properties Evelyn had grown up around, but it was substantial, a solid, well-maintained home that spoke of comfortable wealth without ostentation. Mrs. Brennan had sent word ahead, and Evelyn had been invited to interview the following afternoon. She'd worn her best remaining dress, braided her hair neatly, and practiced explaining who she was without revealing too much. I'm a gentlewoman fallen on difficult circumstances. My family suffered financial losses, and I need to support myself. I have extensive education and experience managing a household. All technically true, just incomplete. Mrs. Whitmore received her in a bright sitting room that smelled of lemon polish and flowers. She was younger than Evelyn expected, maybe 35, with dark hair streaked with gray and eyes that missed nothing. Mrs. Brennan speaks highly of you, Mrs. Whitmore said, gesturing for Evelyn to sit. Though she was vague on details. She said you're educated? Yes, ma'am. I can read and write fluently, handle mathematics and accounts, speak French, and I have some knowledge of history, literature, and music. And you've worked as a governess before? Here was the lie, or the truth, depending on how you looked at it. Not formally, Evelyn said carefully, but I've tutored younger family members extensively. I believe I can provide your children with a thorough, well-rounded education. Mrs. Whitmore studied her. You speak well, too well for someone who needs work this badly. Evelyn's heart hammered, but she kept her expression neutral. Circumstances change, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm sure you understand that education doesn't always translate to security. A long pause. Then Mrs. Whitmore nodded slowly. I have 3 children. Elizabeth is 10, Margaret is 8, and Thomas is 5. They need structure, discipline, and someone who won't be intimidated by Elizabeth's stubbornness or Thomas's endless questions. Can you provide that? Yes. The pay is £30 per year plus room and board. You'll have Sundays off and 1/2 day per week. You'll eat with the family for meals and are expected to maintain appropriate boundaries with the children and staff. If you're unhappy, you give 2 weeks' notice. If I'm unhappy, the same applies. Agreed? £30 per year. Evelyn had no context for whether that was good or terrible, but she had maybe £180 left from her grandmother's money. This would stretch it significantly. Agreed. Good. You can start Monday. Be here by 8 o'clock. We'll provide you with appropriate clothing for teaching. Just like that, it was done. Evelyn had a job, a position, a reason to stay. Reason. She stood, shook Mrs. Whitmore's hand, and walked out of that house feeling like she'd just crossed some invisible threshold into a new life. That evening, back at the inn, she counted out what remained of her money and felt the weight of what she'd done settle more firmly. No going back now. This was real. This was happening. Evelyn Carter, former lady, former fiancée, former invisible woman, was now going to be a governess. And somehow, impossibly, that felt like the most honest thing she'd ever been. Monday arrived cold and gray, the kind of morning where the sky pressed down like wet wool. Evelyn stood at the door of the Whitmore house at precisely 8 o'clock, her borrowed valise heavy in her hand, and knocked. A maid answered. young, barely 16, with flour dusting her apron. You're the new governess? Yes, Miss Carter. The girl looked her up and down with the casual evaluation servants gave each other when determining hierarchy. Evelyn could see the calculation happening. Educated, but needing work. Genteel, but not wealthy. Somewhere in the middle, then. Not quite one of them, but not quite above them either. Follow me, the maid said finally. Mrs. Whitmore's waiting in the schoolroom. The house was warm, well lit, busy with morning routines. Evelyn caught glimpses of other servants moving through hallways, heard children's voices somewhere upstairs. The smell of breakfast, toast and eggs and something sweet, made her stomach clench with hunger she tried to ignore. The schoolroom was on the second floor, a large bright space with tall windows overlooking the garden. 3 desks sat in a neat row, each one clearly sized for a different child. Shelves lined one wall, packed with books. A globe stood in the corner. Maps hung on the walls. It was more resources than Evelyn had expected, more than she'd had access to during her own education, actually. Mrs. Whitmore stood by the window, arms crossed. You're punctual. Good. Yes, ma'am. The children are finishing breakfast. You'll meet them in a few minutes. She gestured around the room. This is your domain. I expect it kept orderly. Lessons run from 9 to noon, then again from 2 to 4. Lunch is at noon, dinner at 6. You'll take all meals with the family. I believe children learn manners by example, not lecture. Evelyn nodded, filing away each instruction. Elizabeth, the eldest, is bright but lazy. She'll do the minimum required unless pushed. Margaret is eager to please but easily distracted. Thomas, Mrs. Whitmore paused, something like affection crossing her face. Thomas is 5 years old and asks approximately 400 questions per day. Try not to murder him. Despite everything, Evelyn felt her mouth twitch toward a smile. I'll do my best. One more thing. Mrs. Whitmore's expression turned serious. I don't care about your past. Whatever brought you here, whatever you left behind, that's your business. But if it follows you to my door and threatens my children's safety or well-being, you'll be gone the same day. Understood? The threat was clear and fair. Understood. Good. Now let's meet your students. The children tumbled into the schoolroom minutes later, a chaotic bundle of energy and curiosity. Elizabeth came first, tall for 10, with her mother's dark hair and a suspicious, evaluating gaze that reminded Evelyn uncomfortably of herself at that age. Margaret followed, smaller, softer, already smiling nervously. And Thomas brought up the rear, a whirlwind of motion and noise. Children, this is Miss Carter. She'll be your new governess. Where's Miss Preston? Elizabeth asked immediately, her tone bordering on rude. Miss Preston married and moved to York, Mrs. Whitmore said calmly. You knew that, Elizabeth. Don't be difficult. Elizabeth's jaw set in a way that promised future conflict. Thomas, meanwhile, had approached Evelyn directly, staring up at her with enormous brown eyes. Do you know any stories? Thomas, manners, Mrs. Whitmore warned. Sorry. Do you know any stories, please? Evelyn crouched down to his level. I know several. Do you like adventure stories or funny ones? Both. Thomas, let Miss Carter breathe, Margaret said, tugging at her brother's sleeve. Then to Evelyn, I'm sorry, he's always like this. Don't apologize for me, Thomas protested. Children. Mrs. Whitmore's voice cut through the brewing argument. Miss Carter needs to begin lessons. Behave yourselves. I'll check in at lunch. She left, closing the door behind her with a soft click that somehow felt final. 3 faces stared at Evelyn, waiting, judging. She stood slowly, buying herself a moment to think. Every governess story she'd ever heard said the first day was crucial. Establish authority immediately, set clear boundaries, show them who was in charge. But looking at these 3 children, Elizabeth defensive, Margaret anxious, Thomas bubbling with barely contained energy, Evelyn found herself thinking about all the tutors and governesses from her own childhood, the ones who'd treated her like a problem to be solved, a mind to be shaped into something useful but not too independent. She'd hated every single one of them. Right, Evelyn said. Before we start formal lessons, I need to know what you already know. Elizabeth, what's the last book you read? Elizabeth blinked, clearly not expecting the question. Pride and Prejudice. Did you enjoy it? A pause, like this might be a trap. Yes? Why? I don't know. I just did. That's not good enough. Evelyn pulled a chair over and sat down, making herself their height rather than towering over them. If you're going to read, you should be able to say why you like something. Otherwise, you're just moving your eyes across words without thinking. So, why did you enjoy Pride and Prejudice? Elizabeth's expression shifted, suspicion giving way to something that might have been interest. I liked that Elizabeth Bennet said what she thought, even when everyone told her not to. Good. That's a real answer. Evelyn turned to Margaret. What about you? What do you like to learn about? I like drawing and plants. Drawing and botany. Excellent. We'll work those into lessons. She looked at Thomas. And you? What interests you? Everything. Thomas bounced on his toes. Why is the sky blue? Why do birds fly? Why do we have to sleep? Why? All right. I see your mother wasn't exaggerating. But Evelyn was smiling. We'll start with questions then. Each of you write down, or draw, Thomas, 3 questions you genuinely want answered. Not what will be on the test, but things you actually care about. Then we'll spend the morning finding answers. All 3 children stared at her. Is this a trick? Elizabeth asked finally. No. But we're supposed to do grammar and sums, and we'll do those too. But learning works better when you care about what you're learning. So, 3 questions. Go. There was a long, uncertain pause. Then Margaret picked up a pencil. Thomas grabbed paper, and after another moment of resistance, Elizabeth did too. By the end of the first week, Evelyn was exhausted in a way she'd never experienced before. Physical labor she could have handled. She'd walked miles in the cold, after all. But managing 3 children with different needs, different personalities, different ways of learning, that required a kind of constant vigilance that left her wrung out by evening. But it also felt good, real, like something that mattered. Elizabeth, once she decided Evelyn wasn't an enemy, turned out to be hungry for challenge. Give her something difficult, and she'd tear into it like a dog with a bone. Margaret needed gentleness and encouragement, but once she trusted you, she'd work herself to exhaustion trying to please. And Thomas was exactly as advertised. Endless questions, boundless energy, and a mind that made connections so fast, Evelyn sometimes struggled to keep up. Teaching them wasn't like managing a household or playing hostess or any of the skills she'd been raised to perform. This required thinking on her feet, adapting constantly, meeting them where they were instead of forcing them into predetermined shapes. She loved it. She also hated how much she loved it, because it reminded her of everything she'd never be able to have in her old life. If she'd married Edmund, if she'd become a duchess, she might have had children eventually. But they wouldn't have been hers, not really. They'd have been raised by nurses and governesses, shaped by tutors and boarding schools, turned into proper heirs and spare copies of their parents. She'd never have gotten to see them think. Miss Carter? Evelyn looked up from the essay she was reviewing, Elizabeth's analysis of a poem they'd read that week, to find Margaret standing in the doorway of the schoolroom. It was late afternoon, lessons finished for the day, but Margaret looked anxious. What's wrong? Mama wants to see you in her sitting room. Evelyn's stomach dropped. 2 weeks in, and already being summoned to Mrs. Whitmore's private rooms couldn't be good. Did she say why? Margaret shook her head, then fled. Evelyn set down the essay, smoothed her dress, and walked to Mrs. Whitmore's sitting room with her heart hammering. Had she done something wrong? Overstepped somehow? Maybe the children had complained. Elizabeth could be contrary, and perhaps Evelyn's teaching methods were too unconventional. She knocked. Come in. Mrs. Whitmore sat at her writing desk, a letter open in front of her. Her expression was unreadable. You wanted to see me, ma'am? Close the door. Evelyn did, feeling the walls close in. Mrs. Whitmore gestured to the chair across from her. Sit. Evelyn sat, hands folded in her lap, waiting. I received an interesting letter today, Mrs. Whitmore said, from the Duke of Thornhill. The world tilted. Evelyn's mouth went dry. She couldn't speak, couldn't think, could barely breathe. Mrs. Whitmore held up the letter. He's looking for a young woman who disappeared from his estate 3 weeks ago. His fiancée, actually. Well-educated, soft-spoken, brown hair, gray eyes, last seen wearing a gray traveling dress. She paused. Sound familiar? Ashai? He's offering a reward for information leading to her return. A substantial reward. Enough that most people wouldn't hesitate to turn her in. Evelyn's vision tunneled. This was it. She'd be sent back, dragged back to that estate, that life, that future she'd run from. Everything she'd built here, the fragile beginning of something real, would disappear. I'm sorry, she managed. I should have told you. Should have what? Announced to a stranger that you were running from an engagement to a duke? Mrs. Whitmore set the letter down. That would have been spectacularly stupid. Evelyn looked up, startled. Mrs. Whitmore's expression hadn't softened exactly, but something in her eyes looked almost amused. I'm not an idiot, Miss Carter, or whatever your real name is. I knew from the moment you walked in here that you were running from something. No woman with your education and bearing ends up needing governess work unless something went very wrong. I just didn't know it was quite this dramatic. Are you going to send me back? That depends. Mrs. Whitmore picked up a pen, tapping it against the desk. Tell me why you left. Evelyn's voice cracked. She swallowed hard, tried again. I heard him, the Duke, talking to a friend about why he chose me. I wasn't a person to him. I was suitable, a solution to a problem. Someone who'd provide heirs and stay out of his way. Most aristocratic marriages are exactly that. I know, but I couldn't... The words stuck in her throat. I couldn't spend my entire life being invisible, being tolerated. I thought I could. I thought duty was enough. But hearing him say it out loud so casually, like I was furniture he was purchasing, she met Mrs. Whitmore's eyes. I wanted one chance to be seen, even if it meant losing everything. Silence stretched between them. Then Mrs. Whitmore picked up the letter from Edmund, walked to the fireplace, and dropped it into the flames. Evelyn watched it catch, curl, turn to ash. You didn't receive that, Mrs. Whitmore said. And if anyone comes asking, we've never heard of anyone matching that description. You're Miss Catherine Carter, a distant cousin of my husband's who needed work after her family's financial troubles. Understood? Yes, but why? Mrs. Whitmore returned to her desk, sitting down with a sigh. Because I was engaged once too, to a man my father chose. And I was raised to believe duty mattered more than happiness. She looked at Evelyn directly. I was lucky. My fiancé died in a riding accident before the wedding. Everyone called it a tragedy, but I felt nothing but relief. Is that terrible? No. I married Mr. Whitmore 3 years later. I chose him. He chose me. We're not romantic, we don't finish each other's sentences or whatever nonsense novels promise, but we respect each other. We built something real. She paused. Every woman should have that chance, the chance to choose. Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest. Not quite relief, but close. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. If this comes back on us, if the Duke shows up at our door, I will prioritize my children's safety over yours. I like you, Miss Carter, and I think you're good for them, but they come first. I understand. Good. Now get out of here. You look like you're about to faint, and I have correspondence to finish. Evelyn stood on shaking legs, reached the door, stopped. Mrs. Whitmore? Yes? My real name is Evelyn. Evelyn Carter. Mrs. Whitmore smiled, small but genuine. Nice to meet you, Evelyn. Now go rest before dinner. You've gone pale. That night, Evelyn lay in her small room, tucked away on the 3rd floor, modest but comfortable, and tried to process what had happened. Edmund was looking for her, actively searching, offering rewards. She'd known he might, but somehow having it confirmed made it real in a way it hadn't been before. He wanted her back, not because he loved her, but because she'd embarrassed him, disrupted his plans, made him look foolish. She was property that had escaped, and he wanted her returned. The anger that rose in her chest was new, hot and sharp and clarifying. She'd apologized in that letter she'd left. Actually apologized for leaving, like breaking an engagement to a man who saw her as breeding stock was something to be sorry for. She wasn't sorry anymore. Let him look. Let him offer rewards. She wasn't going back. But lying there in the dark, listening to the house settle around her, Evelyn couldn't shake the fear. Edmund had resources, connections. If he was determined enough, if he looked hard enough, she pushed the thought away. She'd deal with that if it happened. Right now she had a job, a purpose. 3 children who were actually starting to trust her. That had to be enough. The next morning, Elizabeth was waiting for her in the schoolroom, holding a book Evelyn didn't recognize. I finished the essay, Elizabeth said without preamble. And I started reading this. She held up the book, Sense and Sensibility. It's better than the last one. Bold claim. I'm right, though. Elizabeth sat down at her desk, but instead of pulling out her slate for morning work, she looked at Evelyn directly. Mama told us you're staying, that you're family now. Did she? She said some people try to make you into something you're not, and that's wrong, and that we should be grateful you're here because you actually see us. Elizabeth's expression was fierce. Is someone trying to make you into something you're not? The question hit harder than it should have. Yes, Evelyn said finally. Someone was. Good thing you left then. Good thing. Are you scared they'll find you? Evelyn could have lied. Should have, probably. But Elizabeth was looking at her with that sharp, evaluating gaze, and Evelyn knew she'd see through anything false. Yes, sometimes. Elizabeth nodded, like this confirmed something. Margaret's scared of storms. Thomas is scared of the dark. Mama says being scared doesn't make you weak. It just means you understand danger. Your mother's a smart woman. I know. Elizabeth pulled out her slate. Can we read more poetry today? I want to find another poem to analyze, but something with more action this time. Less sitting around in gardens talking about feelings. Evelyn felt herself smile. I think I can find something. By Margaret's birthday in late November, Evelyn had settled into a rhythm. Wake at 6, wash and dress, breakfast with the family at 7. Lessons from 9 until noon, then lunch. Afternoons were for art, music, outdoor walks when weather permitted. Dinner at 6, then evening study time for Elizabeth while Margaret practiced piano and Thomas, theoretically, prepared for bed. It was structured, demanding, exhausting. It was also the most stable thing Evelyn had ever experienced. For Margaret's 8th birthday, Mrs. Whitmore had invited several local families for tea and cake. Nothing elaborate, but enough to make the house busy with preparation. Evelyn had helped Margaret choose a dress, braided her hair, and assured her at least 10 times that yes, people would like the drawings she'd made as party favors. The party was scheduled for 3 o'clock. By 2:30, the house was chaos. Servants rushing around with trays of sandwiches and cakes, Mr. Whitmore trying to stay out of the way, Thomas asking if he could have cake now or did he have to wait, and Margaret oscillating between excitement and terror. Evelyn was helping set up the drawing room when she heard a commotion at the front door. Raised voices. Someone demanding entry. She froze. Mrs. Whitmore appeared in the doorway, her expression tight. Miss Carter. A word. Evelyn followed her into the hallway, her heart already racing. Standing in the foyer was a man she didn't recognize, middle-aged, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone used to authority. And next to him, looking uncomfortable but determined, was Mrs. Brennan from the inn. This is Mr. Hastings, Mrs. Whitmore said, her voice carefully neutral. He's a private investigator hired by the Duke of Thornhill. He's been asking questions in the village, and Mrs. Brennan, she paused. Mrs. Brennan thought I should know. Mr. Hastings stepped forward, pulling out a folded paper. I'm looking for this woman. He unfolded it, a sketch, rough but recognizable. Evelyn's face stared back at her. She's wanted by His Grace for breach of contract, and she's not here, Mrs. Whitmore said flatly. I have testimony from multiple villagers placing a woman matching this description at the inn 3 weeks ago. Mrs. Brennan confirms she stayed there and mentioned seeking employment. Mr. Hastings looked directly at Evelyn. And I believe this is her. The silence was absolute. Evelyn's mind raced. She could deny it. But the sketch was too accurate, and lying would only make things worse. Before she could speak, a small voice piped up from the stairs. That's Miss Carter. She's our governess. Thomas stood halfway down the staircase, clutching the banister, looking confused by all the tension. Thomas, go to your room, Mrs. Whitmore said. But now. He fled. Mr. Hastings smiled, cold, professional. So you are the missing Miss Carter. His Grace will be most pleased to hear you've been found. I'm not going back, Evelyn said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I won't. That's not your decision to make. His Grace has legal rights. Legal rights to what? She broke an engagement, not the law. Mrs. Whitmore stepped between Evelyn and Mr. Hastings. And if you think you're removing one of my employees from my home without her consent, you're mistaken. This is a private matter between, this is my house, and you're not welcome. Mrs. Whitmore's voice could have cut glass. Mrs. Brennan, thank you for the warning. Mr. Hastings, you have 10 seconds to leave before I have my husband throw you out. Mr. Hastings' expression hardened. You're making a mistake, Mrs. Whitmore. The Duke of Thornhill is a powerful man. I don't care if he's the king. Get out. For a moment, Evelyn thought Mr. Hastings might refuse, but something in Mrs. Whitmore's stance, or maybe just the growing sound of Mr. Whitmore's footsteps approaching, made him reconsider. I'll inform His Grace of Miss Carter's location, he said. What happens next is his decision. He left, the door slamming behind him. Mrs. Brennan lingered, looking apologetic. I'm sorry. I tried to warn you before he got here, but you did exactly right, Mrs. Whitmore said. Thank you. After Mrs. Brennan left, Mrs. Whitmore turned to Evelyn. Her expression was grim. We have a problem. I'll leave, Evelyn said immediately. Tonight. I won't bring this down on... Don't be stupid. Where would you go? He knows you're here now. He'll follow. Mrs. Whitmore paced, thinking, we need a better solution. There isn't one. He's a duke. He has money, influence, and I have something better. Mrs. Whitmore stopped pacing. I have the truth, and I have witnesses willing to tell it. What do you mean? Edmund Thornhill wants you back because you embarrassed him, because running makes him look weak and foolish. Mrs. Whitmore's expression turned calculating. So we make him look worse. We make it clear that pursuing you isn't strength, it's desperation. We turn public opinion against him. How? Leave that to me. Right now we have a birthday party to host. Mrs. Whitmore smoothed her dress, composing herself. Margaret's been looking forward to this for weeks. We're not letting your past ruin her present. The party happened. Evelyn smiled, served cake, admired drawings, and pretended everything was fine. But her hand shook every time someone knocked at the door. That night, after the guests left and the children were in bed, Evelyn sat in her room and faced the truth. She couldn't run forever. Eventually, Edmund would find her again. And next time, he might bring more than just an investigator. The knock at her door was soft. It's me, Mrs. Whitmore's voice said. Evelyn opened it. Mrs. Whitmore held a letter. I've written to my cousin. He's a solicitor in London. I've asked him to look into what legal recourse you actually have. Breaking an engagement isn't a crime, and you took nothing that wasn't yours. Edmund can't force you to marry him. He can make my life impossible. Only if you let him. Mrs. Whitmore handed her the letter. Read it. Tell me if I've missed anything. We'll send it tomorrow. Evelyn took the letter, feeling something shift inside her. Why are you doing this? Because you're a good teacher. Because my children have flourished under your care. Because... Mrs. Whitmore paused. Because no one helped me when I needed it, and I've regretted that ever since. Someone should help you. After she left, Evelyn read the letter. It was thorough, clear, and absolutely devastating to Edmund's position. Mrs. Whitmore had outlined every conversation, every lesson, every moment that proved Evelyn was a capable, independent woman exercising her legal right to refuse marriage. It was also a declaration of war. If they sent this letter, if they pushed back publicly, Edmund wouldn't back down. He'd escalate. Come himself, maybe. Bring pressure to bear on the Whitmores. Make everything harder. But the alternative was running again, and again, and again. Evelyn picked up a pen. At the bottom of the letter, she added one line in her own hand. I will not be convenient anymore. She sealed it herself and left it on Mrs. Whitmore's desk to be posted. Whatever happened next, she would face it standing still. The response came faster than expected. 5 days after Mrs. Whitmore's letter was posted, a carriage arrived at midday. Black lacquer with a ducal crest emblazoned on the door. Evelyn was in the schoolroom with the children when she heard it, the sound of wheels on gravel carrying through the open window like a death knell. Elizabeth looked up from her Latin translation. Someone's here. Keep working, Evelyn said, but her voice sounded wrong even to her own ears. Margaret's pencil stopped moving. Miss Carter? You look... The door opened. Mrs. Whitmore stood there, her face pale. Evelyn, come with me. Now. The children... Elizabeth can supervise for 10 minutes. Come. Evelyn followed her down the hallway, her heart hammering so hard she thought she might be sick. Through the window at the landing, she could see the carriage. A footman stood beside it, waiting. He's here? Evelyn managed. No. He sent his solicitor, Mr. James Rutherford. Mrs. Whitmore's jaw was tight. He's in the drawing room with my husband. They've been talking for 20 minutes. I thought you should know before you walk in there. What does he want? To negotiate your return, presumably. But Evelyn... Mrs. Whitmore caught her arm. You don't have to do this. You can leave through the back, take a horse. Be gone before... No. The word came out harder than intended. I'm done running. Mrs. Whitmore studied her face, then nodded. All right, but I'm coming with you. The drawing room felt smaller than usual. Mr. Whitmore stood by the fireplace, his expression carefully neutral. And seated in the best chair, looking perfectly composed, was a man in his 50s with silver hair and cold, intelligent eyes. He stood when they entered. Ah, Miss Carter, I presume. Evelyn didn't answer. I'm James Rutherford, solicitor to His Grace the Duke of Thornhill. I've come to discuss the rather unfortunate situation that has arisen from your sudden departure. There's nothing to discuss, Evelyn said. I'm not going back. I understand you feel that way. However, His Grace has invested considerable time and resources in this engagement. There are contracts, expectations, reputations at stake. I signed nothing. Your father did, on your behalf. The words hit like a physical blow. That's not contracts require consent. From a legal guardian, yes, which your father was at the time. Rutherford pulled out a document, unfolding it with deliberate care. This is a betrothal contract signed by your father and His Grace 3 months before the official engagement announcement. It stipulates terms, timelines, and, most relevantly, penalties for breach of contract. What penalties? Mrs. Whitmore demanded. Financial compensation to His Grace for damages to reputation and prospects. The sum outlined is £5,000. The room went silent. £5,000. More money than Evelyn could imagine, more than her father had, certainly. The gambling debts that had necessitated her advantageous marriage in the first place had already devastated the family finances. That's absurd, Mr. Whitmore said. You can't enforce. I can and will. Unless Miss Carter returns to fulfill her obligations, His Grace will pursue legal action against her family for the full amount. Rutherford looked at Evelyn. I understand you have a younger sister. Caroline, isn't it? 17, unmarried, with her whole life ahead of her. It would be unfortunate if your family's financial ruin prevented her from making a suitable match. The threat was clear, calculated, cruel. Evelyn felt the walls closing in. She'd thought leaving meant only her future was at stake, but Edmund had found the one lever that could still move her, her family. Caroline, who'd done nothing wrong, who still believed in happy endings. That's blackmail, Mrs. Whitmore said, her voice shaking with fury. That's the law. Miss Carter may have fled her responsibilities, but contracts exist for a reason. Rutherford folded the document, tucking it back inside his coat. His Grace is prepared to be reasonable. Return willingly, marry as agreed, and the matter is settled. No lawsuit, no financial penalties, no scandal. And if I refuse, then your family faces ruin. Your father will be pursued for the full amount. Your sister's prospects will be destroyed, and your name will be dragged through every court and newspaper in England. His Grace has no interest in mercy for those who publicly humiliate him. Evelyn couldn't breathe. Every choice led to disaster. Return and spend her life invisible, or stay and destroy everyone she'd left behind. She needs time to consider, Mr. Whitmore said. She has until tomorrow evening. I'm staying at the inn in the village. His Grace expects an answer by 8 o'clock. Rutherford stood, adjusting his coat. I suggest you choose wisely, Miss Carter. Pride is an expensive luxury. After he left, Evelyn stood frozen in the drawing room while the Whitmores argued about legal options, precedents, ways to fight back. Their voices washed over her like water. She'd been so stupid, so naive, thinking she could just walk away, that her choices only affected herself. Edmund had known exactly what would bring her back, and he'd aimed directly at the weakest point. Evelyn, Mrs. Whitmore's hand on her shoulder. We'll find a way. There isn't one. There's always it. No. Evelyn pulled away. He's right. The contract is real. The penalties are enforceable. If I don't go back, Caroline suffers. My father suffers. Everyone suffers except me. So you're just going to surrender? What choice do I have? The question hung unanswered. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to find a solution that didn't exist. Return to Edmund? Lose herself. Stay here. Destroy her family. There was no third option. Unless... The thought came slowly, like something surfacing from deep water. What if the contract could be invalidated? She sat up, reaching for the candle. Her hand shook as she lit it, her mind racing. Contracts required consent from both parties. Her father had signed on her behalf, yes, but she'd been of legal age when the contract was made. Did that matter? Could she argue she should have signed herself? That the contract was invalid without her direct consent? She needed someone who knew law better than she did. The house was dark and silent as Evelyn crept downstairs. She'd seen Mrs. Whitmore's cousin's response letter, the solicitor from London, sitting on the desk in the study. Maybe there was something there, some precedent or loophole that could help. The study door was closed but unlocked. Evelyn slipped inside, holding the candle high. The desk was covered with papers, household accounts, correspondence, bills. She sorted through them carefully, looking for the London solicitor's letter. Looking for something? Evelyn spun, heart stopping. Mr. Whitmore stood in the doorway, holding his own candle. He didn't look angry, just tired. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I was looking for the letter from my wife's cousin. I know." He walked to the desk, pulled open a drawer, and extracted a sealed envelope. "This arrived this evening. I haven't shown it to my wife yet." He handed it to her. Evelyn broke the seal with shaking hands, unfolding the paper. The solicitor's response was 3 pages long, dense with legal terminology. She forced herself to read slowly, absorbing each word. The conclusion hit like a punch to the stomach. While Miss Carter's situation is sympathetic, the contract appears legally sound. Without evidence of coercion or proof that she explicitly refused consent at the time of signing, challenging it in court would be both costly and unlikely to succeed. "I regret I cannot offer more hopeful counsel." "I'm sorry," Mr. Whitmore said quietly. "I'd hoped for better news." Evelyn set the letter down, feeling the last of her hope drain away. "It's over then." "Not necessarily." He pulled out a chair, gesturing for her to sit. "There may be another way." "What way?" "You can't fight the contract, but you could make yourself unmarriageable." Evelyn frowned. "I don't understand." "The contract stipulates that you marry His Grace. It says nothing about what kind of wife you'll be." Mr. Whitmore leaned forward. "What if you returned, but made it absolutely clear you'd be the worst possible Duchess? What if you caused such scandal, such public embarrassment, that Edmund would be forced to end the engagement himself? He'd never— He might, if the cost of keeping you exceeded the cost of letting you go." Mr. Whitmore's expression was serious. "It's risky. You'd be walking back into his control with no guarantee it would work, but it might be your only option." Evelyn thought about it, returning to Edmund's estate, to that life, but as someone different. Someone who refused to be invisible, who spoke her mind, challenged him, made his life as uncomfortable as he'd planned to make hers unremarkable. It was insane. It was also the first plan that didn't end with her complete surrender. "What would your wife think of this?" "She'd tell you it's dangerous and foolish," he paused. "She'd also probably help you plan it." Morning came gray and cold. Evelyn stood at the window of her room, watching the children play in the garden below. Thomas was building something with sticks while Margaret drew in her sketchbook, and Elizabeth read under a tree. 3 months ago, she hadn't known these children existed. Now the thought of leaving them felt like tearing off her own skin. But she'd made her decision. The knock came at 9 o'clock, Mrs. Whitmore holding tea and looking like she hadn't slept either. "Don't," Evelyn said before Mrs. Whitmore could speak. "Don't try to talk me out of it." "I'm not here to talk you out of anything. I'm here to help you pack." Mrs. Whitmore set down the tea. "And to give you this." She pulled out a small leather journal, pressing it into Evelyn's hands. "What is it?" "Documentation. Everything Edmund said the night you overheard him. Everything his investigator said when he came here. Every detail of how he's pursued and threatened you." Mrs. Whitmore's expression was fierce. "If you're going back into that house, you're going armed. Write down everything he says, everything he does. If he tries to trap you, if he threatens you, if he so much as looks at you wrong, document it. And if you need to get out, if things go badly, you'll have evidence." Evelyn clutched the journal. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Come back safe. That's all I ask." Mrs. Whitmore's voice cracked slightly. "The children need you. We need you." By noon, Evelyn was dressed in her old traveling clothes, her small bag packed once again. The children gathered in the front hall, confusion and distress written across all 3 faces. "Why are you leaving?" Thomas asked, his voice small. "I have to go take care of some business." "What business?" Elizabeth demanded. "You're coming back, right?" Evelyn knelt down, meeting her eyes. "I don't know, I hope so." "That's not good enough." Elizabeth's face crumpled, and for the first time since Evelyn had met her, she looked like the 10-year-old child she was. You're just like Miss Preston. Everyone leaves. I don't want to. Then don't. Margaret was crying openly now. Please don't go. Thomas just grabbed onto Evelyn's dress, holding tight. Mrs. Whitmore had to gently pry him away. Children, Miss Carter has to go. But she's taken good care of you, hasn't she? She's taught you to be brave and think for yourselves. Now you have to let her be brave too. The carriage ride to the inn felt like a funeral procession. When Evelyn arrived, Rutherford was waiting outside, looking satisfied. A wise decision, Miss Carter. I have conditions. His eyebrows rose. You're hardly in a position to... I'll return to the estate. I'll fulfill the contract. But I will not be locked in my room or otherwise restrained. I will have freedom of movement within the house and grounds, and the lawsuit against my family will be dropped immediately. His Grace will decide. Those are my conditions. Accept them, or explain to His Grace why you failed to bring me back. Rutherford's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Very well. I'll convey your terms. The journey to Thornhill Estate took 2 days. Long, silent days in a carriage with Rutherford, who spent the entire time reading documents and ignoring her completely. Evelyn used the time to prepare, mentally cataloging everything she knew about Edmund, about the estate, about the world she was walking back into. She would not be the same woman who left. When they finally rolled through the gates of Thornhill Estate, Evelyn felt the weight of it settle over her like a shroud. The house loomed massive and cold, exactly as she remembered. Nothing had changed, except her. Edmund was waiting in the front hall. He looked older than she remembered, or maybe she just saw him more clearly now. His face was handsome in a severe way, his posture military straight, his expression giving away nothing. Miss Carter, he said, welcome home. This isn't my home. His eyes narrowed. Perhaps we should speak privately. He led her to his study, closed the door. The moment it clicked shut, his composure cracked. Do you have any idea what you've put me through? The embarrassment? The gossip? I know exactly what I put you through. Inconvenience. More than inconvenience. You made me look weak, indecisive, like I couldn't control my own household. I'm not your household. I'm a person. You're my fiancé. You gave your word. My father gave his word. I gave nothing. Evelyn set down her bag, meeting his gaze directly. But I'm here now. I'll marry you. I'll fulfill the contract, but I won't disappear. I won't be quiet, and I won't pretend this is anything other than what it is. Edmund stared at her like she'd grown a second head. What's happened to you? I woke up. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, you'll regret this defiance. Possibly, but I won't regret leaving. He turned away, gripping the edge of his desk. The wedding is in 2 weeks. My mother is handling arrangements. You'll meet with her tomorrow to discuss details. Until then, you're confined to the East Wing. I said no confinement. You're not locked in. You're simply not welcome in the rest of the house until you learn how to behave appropriately. Meaning until I learn to disappear again. Meaning until you remember your place. Evelyn picked up her bag. Where's my room? 3rd floor, East Corridor. The servants will show you. He didn't look at her. Dinner is at 8. You're expected to attend. The room they gave her was the same one she'd occupied before. Pretty, tasteful, utterly impersonal. Someone had already unpacked her meager belongings, hanging her 2 dresses in the massive wardrobe where they looked lost and pathetic. Evelyn sat on the bed, pulled out Mrs. Whitmore's journal, and began to write. First day back. Edmund's first words. Welcome home. Mine. This isn't my home. He called my leaving an embarrassment. Said I made him look weak. Never asked if I was safe, if I was hurt, if I needed anything. Only concerned with how my absence affected him. He's confined me to the East Wing. Says it's not confinement because the door isn't locked. But intention is clear. Isolation until I submit. The wedding is in 2 weeks. That night at dinner was an exercise in tension. Edmund's mother, the Dowager Duchess, presided over the meal with icy disapproval radiating from every pore. She was in her 60s, impeccably dressed, with the same cold eyes as her son. So, she said, after the first course was served, the prodigal fiancé returns. Mother, Edmund warned, I'm simply welcoming our guest, although guest seems too generous a word for someone who caused such spectacular scandal. Evelyn cut her meat carefully. I apologize for any inconvenience. Inconvenience? The dowager laughed, short and sharp. Is that what we're calling it? I had to cancel 2 dinner parties and endure 3 weeks of pitying looks from every society matron in the county. But yes, inconvenient is one word for it. Then perhaps you should have raised a son who sees women as people instead of acquisitions. The dining room went silent. Edmund's fork clattered against his plate. Excuse me. You heard me. Evelyn set down her knife, looking directly at the dowager. Your son chose me because I was suitable and convenient, because he thought I'd be too meek to cause problems. He was wrong. You ungrateful? I'm not ungrateful, I'm honest, which I realize isn't valued here, but I'm done pretending otherwise. Edmund stood so fast his chair scraped backward. That's enough. Is it? Because I'm just getting started. Go to your room. No, go to your room. Evelyn stood slowly, deliberately. I'll leave because I choose to, not because you told me to. There's a difference. She walked out, heart hammering, hands shaking with adrenaline. Behind her she heard the dowager's voice. You cannot possibly marry that woman. And Edmund's reply, tight with anger. Watch me. Back in her room, Evelyn added to the journal, dinner. Challenged both Edmund and his mother. Edmund ordered me to my room like a child. I left on my own terms. His mother thinks he can't marry me now. He insists he will, but his voice suggested this is about pride, not desire. Good. The more I cost him, the more likely he is to break. The next 2 days followed a similar pattern. Evelyn attended meals, spoke her mind, refused to apologize. She questioned the dowager's wedding plans, disagreed with Edmund's opinions at dinner, and generally made herself as inconvenient as possible. On the 3rd day, Edmund cornered her in the library. This needs to stop. What needs to stop? This performance, this defiance. You're embarrassing yourself. I'm being honest. If that embarrasses you, that's your problem. He grabbed her arm, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to make his point. I could make your life very difficult. You already have. What more can you do? For a moment, something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Then he released her, stepping back. You want to know what I can do? I can write to your family. Tell them how disappointed I am in your behavior. Mention how the lawsuit is still pending your cooperation. The threat landed. Evelyn felt her resolve waver. That's what I thought, Edmund said, seeing her hesitation. You're not as brave as you pretend. You're just a spoiled girl playing at rebellion. But eventually, you'll remember that actions have consequences. He left her standing there, shaking with fury and fear. That night, Evelyn wrote, Edmund threatened my family today, reminded me the lawsuit still exists. I thought I could push him into ending this, but he's more stubborn than I expected. And he knows exactly where I'm weak. I don't know if this plan will work. I don't know if I'm strong enough to see it through, but I have to try. The wedding preparations continued. Invitations were sent. The dowager selected flowers. A dress was ordered, white, expensive, utterly devoid of personality. Evelyn was measured, fitted, prodded like livestock being prepared for market. She attended each fitting and spoke her mind at each meeting, questioned every choice, disagreed with every plan, and slowly she watched the dowager's patience fray. 1 week before the wedding, the dowager summoned her to the drawing room. Sit down, girl. Evelyn sat. I'm going to be blunt because I don't have time for games. You don't want this marriage. That much is clear, and frankly, after seeing how you conduct yourself, neither do I. Then end it. I can't. My son has staked his reputation on this. If he backs out now, he looks weak. If you run again, your family is ruined. We're trapped. The dowager leaned forward. But there's a third option. What option? You could be found unsuitable for legitimate reasons. Reasons that would allow my son to end the engagement without losing face. Evelyn's heart raced. What kind of reasons? Scandal. Something bad enough that continuing the engagement would damage his reputation more than ending it. The dowager's expression was calculating. You're already pushing boundaries. Push harder. Give us a reason to send you away. You want me to ruin myself? I want you to free us both. You don't belong here. You never did. But if you're clever about it, you can escape without destroying your family in the process. It was the opening Evelyn had been working toward, but hearing it stated so plainly made it real in a terrifying way. What kind of scandal? That's for you to determine, but make it public. Make it undeniable. And make it soon. We're running out of time. After the Dowager left, Evelyn sat alone in the drawing room, her mind racing. She'd wanted Edmund to end the engagement. She'd pushed and prodded and challenged him, hoping he'd break first. But he was too proud, too stubborn. So the Dowager was right. If Evelyn wanted out, she'd have to destroy her own reputation so thoroughly that keeping her would be worse than losing her. The question was, how far was she willing to go? That night, Evelyn barely slept. She lay awake planning, discarding ideas, trying to find something that would work. By morning, she had a plan. Risky, potentially disastrous, but possible. She needed help, and she knew exactly who to ask. The servants at Thornhill Estate moved through the house like ghosts, seen but not noticed, present but invisible. Evelyn had learned their names in her first engagement period, a habit that had confused them then. Now she sought out the one servant who'd always been kind, Mary, a young housemaid with a quick smile and sharp eyes. Evelyn found her in the laundry room, folding linens. "Mary, I need your help." Mary looked up, startled. "Miss Carter, you shouldn't be down here." "I know, but I need to ask you something, and I need you to trust me." Evelyn glanced around, ensuring they were alone. "Do you know anyone in the village? Someone who works for the newspaper?" Mary's eyes widened. "The newspaper? Miss, what are you— I can't explain everything, but I need to get a message to them, anonymously. Can you help?" Mary bit her lip, clearly torn. Then, "My brother, he does deliveries for the print shop. He might be able to." "Perfect. I need him to deliver a letter, not from me, from an anonymous source. Can he do that?" "What's in the letter?" "The truth." Evelyn met her eyes. "About why I left. About what kind of man the Duke really is. About marriages built on contracts instead of consent." Mary stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. "I'll talk to him. But miss, if this gets back to you, it won't. No one can know I was involved. That's crucial." "All right, give me the letter." Evelyn had written it the night before, carefully worded to be damaging without being libelous. She pulled it from her pocket, pressed it into Mary's hands. "Thank you. And Mary, after this, whatever happens, find yourself a better position, somewhere that values you. You deserve more than this place." Mary's eyes filled with tears. "Good luck, Miss Carter." The letter appeared in the local newspaper 3 days later. Evelyn was at breakfast when Edmund stormed into the dining room, paper clenched in his fist. "Did you see this?" The Dowager took the paper, read it. Her face went pale. Evelyn kept her expression carefully neutral. "See what? Someone has written to the paper. About our engagement, about your departure." Edmund's voice was shaking, with fury or fear Evelyn couldn't tell. "They've printed details, private details, about contracts and coercion and— Let me see." Evelyn took the paper, reading her own words printed in black and white. An anonymous account on the nature of arranged marriages. "It has come to this writer's attention that a certain aristocratic engagement recently disrupted by the bride's departure was not the love match society assumed. Rather, it was a business arrangement, a contract signed between fathers, with the bride's consent neither sought nor required. When the young woman in question discovered she was valued only for her breeding potential and social utility, she made the radical choice to leave." It went on for 3 paragraphs, damning, detailed, devastatingly accurate. "Who wrote this?" Edmund demanded. "I have no idea." "Don't lie to me. You're the only one who would benefit from— Am I? Because it seems to me this makes you look far worse than it makes me look." Evelyn set down the paper. "Maybe someone simply told the truth." The Dowager stood abruptly. "This is a disaster. Every family in the county will have read this by now. They'll be talking, judging." "Then we sue for libel," Edmund said. "On what grounds?" "Nothing in that letter is false." The Dowager's voice was ice. "We can't fight truth, Edmund. We can only manage it." "By doing what?" "By ending this engagement immediately, before it gets worse." Edmund turned on his mother. "Absolutely not. I won't." "You will. Because if you marry her now, you'll be admitting everything in that letter is true. You'll be the villain who forced a woman into marriage despite her clear reluctance. Is that the legacy you want?" The silence stretched. Evelyn watched Edmund's face, saw the moment he realized his mother was right. "Fine," he said finally. "The engagement is ended. She can leave." "Wait," Evelyn stood. The contract, the lawsuit. Edmund's smile was cruel. Already filed. The lawsuit proceeds regardless. But you said, I said I'd drop it if you cooperated. You clearly haven't, so your family can deal with the consequences. He walked out, leaving Evelyn standing there, her victory turning to ash. She'd freed herself, but she'd condemned her family in the process. The dowager watched her with something almost like pity. You played this well, girl, but you forgot the most important rule. Men like my son don't lose. They just make sure someone else pays the price. That afternoon, Evelyn was escorted from the estate. No ceremony, no goodbye, just a carriage, a driver, and instructions to return to her family's home. She'd won. She was free. But the cost was still to be determined. As the carriage rolled through the gates, Evelyn pulled out Mrs. Whitmore's journal and wrote one final entry. I'm free. The engagement is ended. But Edmund has filed the lawsuit anyway. My family will be ruined unless I can find a way to stop it. I thought escaping meant winning. I was wrong. The real battle is just beginning. The carriage stopped 2 miles from her family's estate. Evelyn knocked on the roof, startling the driver. Take me to the village instead. The Whitmore house. The driver twisted around, frowning. His Grace said, His Grace doesn't control me anymore. The Whitmore house. Now. He hesitated, then shrugged and turned the horses. Probably figured she wasn't his problem once she was out of the carriage. Evelyn pressed her forehead against the cold window glass, watching the countryside roll past. She couldn't go home. Not yet. Not until she had a plan that didn't end with her father in debtor's prison and Caroline unmarriageable. The newspaper letter had worked. She was free. But Edmund's final move had been vicious and perfectly calculated. File the lawsuit anyway. Make her freedom meaningless. Ensure she'd spend the rest of her life knowing she'd traded her family's security for her own. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. When the carriage pulled up to the Whitmore house, it was late afternoon. Evelyn climbed out stiffly, every muscle aching from 2 days of travel, and knocked. Mrs. Whitmore opened the door herself. Her eyes went wide. Evelyn? What? I thought you were… The engagement's ended, but I need help. Evelyn's voice cracked. Please. Mrs. Whitmore pulled her inside, called for tea, settled her in the drawing room. Within minutes, Mr. Whitmore appeared, then the children, Thomas launching himself at her, Margaret crying, Elizabeth trying very hard to look like she wasn't crying. You came back, Elizabeth said finally. I came back. After the children were sent upstairs, protesting loudly, Evelyn explained everything. The return to Thornhill, the confrontations, the letter to the newspaper, Edmund's parting shot with the lawsuit. He's going after the full £5,000, she finished. My family can't pay it. They'll lose everything. The contract was signed under false pretenses, Mr. Whitmore said, pacing. You were never adequately informed of its terms. That has to count for something. His solicitor claimed it doesn't matter. My father had legal authority to sign. Then we challenged the damages. £5,000 for a broken engagement? That's absurd. No court would… Every court would. Mrs. Whitmore's voice was flat. He's a duke. She's nobody. They'll side with him because that's how the system works. Silence fell. There has to be something, Evelyn said. Some way to fight this that doesn't require money we don't have. Mrs. Whitmore stood abruptly. The letter. The one you sent to the newspaper. Do you have any proof you wrote it? No. That was the point. It had to be anonymous. But you documented everything else. Mrs. Whitmore grabbed the journal from where Evelyn had set it on the table. This. Every conversation, every threat, every admission of his real intentions. This is evidence. Evidence of what? That the engagement was built on deception. That you were treated as property, not a person. That Edmund never intended a real marriage. He wanted a broodmare who'd stay silent. Mrs. Whitmore's expression was fierce. Public opinion is already turning against him because of that newspaper letter. What if we push further? What if we publish more? Not anonymously this time, in your own name. Tell the whole story. That's social suicide, Mr. Whitmore said. No one would… I'm already socially dead, Evelyn cut in. A woman who breaks an engagement is ruined whether she speaks up or stays silent. At least this way, I'd have a voice. But the lawsuit would look monstrous if the details became public. Evelyn felt something shift inside her, fear giving way to clarity. He's counting on shame keeping me quiet, on me accepting ruin rather than fighting back. But what if I don't? Mrs. Whitmore smiled slowly. What if you don't? The next morning, Evelyn sat at the writing desk in the Whitmore's guest room and began drafting a letter. Not to a newspaper this time, to every newspaper in the region. A full account holding nothing back. My name is Evelyn Carter. 3 months ago, I fled an engagement to the Duke of Thornhill. Not because I am capricious or ungrateful, but because I discovered I was not marrying a partner. I was fulfilling a contract. She wrote about overhearing Edmund's conversation, about being described as suitable and acceptable to look at, about learning that her value lay entirely in her ability to produce heirs and cause no trouble. I left because I believed women deserve more than being reduced to breeding stock. I left because I wanted one chance to be seen as fully human. She detailed the investigation, the threats against her family, the pressure to return, Edmund's cruelty, the dowager's calculation, the entire system that treated women as property to be managed. Now, the Duke of Thornhill seeks £5,000 in damages for breach of contract, despite ending the engagement himself. He claims injury to his reputation and prospects. I ask you to consider, what kind of man values his pride at £5,000? What kind of man pursues financial ruin against a family for the crime of a daughter who refused to be convenient? The letter ran 4 pages. When she finished, her hand was cramping and her eyes burned with exhaustion. But every word was true. Every word was necessary. She showed it to the Whitmores at breakfast. Mr. Whitmore read it twice, his expression growing grimmer. If you publish this, there's no going back. You'll be openly defying a duke. The social consequences, I understand. I don't think you do. You'll never marry. Never be welcomed in society. Your family will be tainted by association. They're already being sued for £5,000. How much worse can it get? Mrs. Whitmore set down her tea. He's right that it's dangerous, but he's wrong about it being hopeless. Sometimes the only way forward is through. She looked at Evelyn directly. Are you prepared for this fight? I have to be. That's not what I asked. Evelyn thought about the past 3 months, leaving everything, learning to survive, finding work, being dragged back, escaping again. Every step had been terrifying. Every choice had carried consequences. But she'd also discovered something. She was stronger than she'd been taught to believe, braver than anyone expected, and tired of being afraid. Yes, she said, I'm prepared. They sent copies to 6 newspapers. The first published it 2 days later under a headline that made Evelyn's stomach clench. Duke's former fiancée breaks silence, a system of coercion exposed. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Some defended Edmund. Of course, a duke had the right to choose his wife's qualities. Of course, contracts mattered. Of course, the girl was clearly hysterical and ungrateful. But others were angry. Women, mostly, writing their own letters to newspapers, sharing their own stories of marriages arranged without consent, of being valued only for dowries or connections, of living as decorative furniture in their own homes. I was 15 when my father sold me to a man of 40, one woman wrote. I am now 63, and I have spent 48 years being invisible in my own life. Miss Carter had the courage I never found. For that, she has my admiration. Another. My daughter wept the night before her wedding. I told her it was normal, that all brides were nervous. But I knew the truth. She was grieving her own life. We do this to our daughters, generation after generation, and call it duty. The letters kept coming. Not all sympathetic, but enough. Enough to shift something. 3 days after the first publication, Mrs. Whitmore received a visitor, a woman named Mrs. Patricia Ashford, wife of a prominent barrister. She'd read Evelyn's letter and wanted to help. My husband has connections in London, Mrs. Ashford explained over tea. Lawyers who handle unusual cases. Cases where the powerful abuse the law for personal vendettas. The contract is legally sound, Evelyn said. Multiple solicitors have confirmed it. The contract may be sound, but the damages aren't. £5,000 for a broken engagement? My husband believes we could argue that the amount is punitive rather than compensatory, that it's designed to destroy rather than repair. Would that work? I don't know, but it's a strategy. And right now you need strategy more than certainty. Mrs. Ashford's husband, Mr. Jonathan Ashford, arrived the following week. He was younger than Evelyn expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and an intensity that reminded her of Mrs. Whitmore. He read through Evelyn's journal, asked hundreds of questions, and finally sat back with a considering expression. This is good. Very good. The documentation, the contemporaneous notes, the pattern of coercion, it builds a compelling narrative. But can we win? In court? Unlikely. He's a duke with unlimited resources. Even if we prove the damages were excessive, he'd appeal, drag it out for years, bankrupt your family through legal fees alone. Evelyn's hope deflated. Then what's the point? The point is we don't need to win in court. We need to make him drop the suit. Mr. Ashford leaned forward. Public opinion is shifting. That newspaper letter lit a fire. Women are talking, questioning, getting angry. Men in power hate that. They hate being seen as villains. Edmund doesn't care what people think. Maybe not, but his peers do. Other aristocrats, potential allies, social connections, they care very much about reputation. If this lawsuit makes Edmund look like a petty tyrant punishing a woman for refusing him, he loses something more valuable than £5,000. He loses status. So we make him famous, Mrs. Whitmore said slowly. We make this lawsuit the story everyone's talking about. We turn him into the villain in a public drama. Exactly. Force him to choose, drop the suit and look merciful, or proceed and look monstrous. He'll choose monstrous, Evelyn said. He's too proud to back down. Then we make being monstrous cost more than backing down. Mr. Ashford pulled out papers. I have contacts at 3 London newspapers. If I can get them to cover this story, not just Miss Carter's letter, but the lawsuit itself, the details of the contract, the entire sordid business, it becomes a national scandal. Every drawing room in England will be discussing whether forcing women into marriages through financial coercion is acceptable. It won't change the law, Mr. Whitmore pointed out. No, but it might change one man's calculation of what's worth fighting for. Over the next 2 weeks, Mr. Ashford orchestrated a campaign. Letters to London papers, interviews with sympathetic journalists, stories about Evelyn's flight, her work as a governess, her return to Thornhill and subsequent escape. Each article painted Edmund not as an injured party, but as a man wielding power to punish independence. The Duke of Thornhill's reputation began to crack. Social invitations dried up. Business partners grew distant. Other aristocrats, the ones who prided themselves on being modern and enlightened, publicly distanced themselves from such antiquated practices. And through it all, Edmund remained silent. No public statements, no rebuttals, just the lawsuit, grinding forward through the legal system like a machine designed to crush. Until the letter arrived. It came on a gray morning in early December, delivered by courier to the Whitmore house, addressed to Evelyn in handwriting she didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Miss Carter, I am writing on behalf of a group of women who have followed your story with great interest. We represent various social and economic classes, but we share a common understanding that the system which governs women's lives is unjust. We would like to help. If you are willing, we are prepared to fund your legal defense. We have secured pledges totaling £8,000, enough to fight the Duke's lawsuit and cover any potential damages should you lose. Additionally, we have lawyers willing to work at reduced rates and connections to ensure your story reaches as wide an audience as possible. We ask nothing in return except that you continue to speak truth. We believe your voice matters. We believe this fight matters. And we believe it is time women stopped accepting the roles assigned to us. If you wish to accept our assistance, send word to the address below. Yours in solidarity, the Ladies' Reform Circle. Evelyn read it 3 times, then handed it to Mrs. Whitmore with shaking hands. This is real? Mrs. Whitmore scanned the letter. The Ladies' Reform Circle. I've heard of them. Women's suffrage advocates, legal reform activists. They're serious and connected. They want to fund my defense? They want to make you a symbol, a test case for challenging the way women are treated under contract law. Mrs. Whitmore looked up. This is bigger than Edmund now. This is about whether women can fight back at all. The weight of that settled over Evelyn. She'd wanted to escape. That was all. One woman trying to save herself from a life of invisible servitude. But somehow, her escape had become a rallying point. Other women saw themselves in her story, saw their own trapped lives, their own silent suffering, their own buried rage. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this, Evelyn said quietly. Neither do I. Mrs. Whitmore's honesty was startling. But I know you're too stubborn to quit. So the question isn't whether you're strong enough. It's whether you're willing to try. Evelyn thought about her sister Caroline, facing the wreckage of their family's finances, about the Whitmore children, who'd been taught through her example that choices mattered, about all the letters from women who'd written to say, me too. This happened to me too. I thought I was alone. She thought about Edmund, sitting in his estate, confident that money and power would win. Send word, Evelyn said. I accept their help. The legal battle that followed was brutal and exhausting. Edmund's lawyers argued that the contract was sacred, that Evelyn's consent was implicit through her father's signature, that £5,000 was reasonable compensation for injury to a duke's reputation. The Ladies' Reform Circle's lawyers countered that the contract was coercive, that Evelyn's consent had never been sought, that the damages were punitive and designed to ruin. They brought witnesses, Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Ashford, even Mary the housemaid who testified about the environment at Thornhill Estate. But the real battle happened outside the courtroom, in newspapers, in drawing rooms, in public opinion. Every day brought new articles, some vicious, calling Evelyn ungrateful, hysterical, a bad example for young women. Others sympathetic, praising her courage, questioning the system, calling for legal reform. The country divided. Not cleanly, not simply, but enough that Edmund could no longer claim universal support. And then, 6 weeks into the legal proceedings, something unexpected happened. Edmund's mother, the Dowager Duchess, published her own letter. It was short, carefully worded, devastating. I have watched this lawsuit proceed with growing discomfort. My son believes he is defending his honor, but I question what honor is served by bankrupting a family whose only crime was a daughter who refused to be silent. I raised my son to value integrity, to understand that power carries responsibility. I fear I have failed in this, as he now wields his considerable resources to punish rather than to build. Miss Carter left because she was treated as property. The solution is not to pursue her with greater force, but to examine why women continue to be valued primarily for their utility rather than their humanity. I ask my son to drop this lawsuit, not because Miss Carter deserves mercy, but because continuing it makes him a smaller man than I raised him to be. The letter appeared in the London papers the same day Edmund was scheduled to give a deposition. Evelyn heard about it from Mr. Ashford, who arrived at the Whitmore house breathless with news. The Dowager turned on him, publicly, in print. He was almost laughing with disbelief. I've never seen anything like it. A mother essentially calling her son a bully in front of all England. What does this mean? Evelyn asked. It means the tide has turned. If his own mother thinks he's wrong, if she's willing to say so publicly, he can't claim moral high ground. He's just a powerful man crushing someone weaker. So he'll drop the suit? I don't know, but the pressure just increased exponentially. They didn't have to wait long for an answer. 2 days later, Edmund's lawyers filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit. No explanation, no apology. Just a terse legal document withdrawing all claims. It was over. The Ladies' Reform Circle sent champagne. Mrs. Ashford organized a celebration. Women Evelyn had never met wrote letters of congratulation. But Evelyn felt strangely hollow. She'd won. The lawsuit was gone. Her family was safe. She was free. But she wasn't the same person who'd left that estate 6 months ago. That woman had wanted safety, invisibility, permission to exist quietly. This woman, the one who'd fought a duke and won, wanted something different, something more. She was sitting in the Whitmore's garden watching snow begin to fall when Mrs. Whitmore found her. You look contemplative. I'm trying to figure out what happens next. Next you rest. You've earned it. Mrs. Whitmore sat beside her. The children are desperate to resume lessons, by the way. Thomas has been asking daily when you'll return to the schoolroom. Do you still want me, after all this publicity? Want you? Evelyn, your family, of course we want you. Mrs. Whitmore paused. But I wonder if you want us. You've become someone important, a symbol. Do you really want to go back to teaching 3 children in a provincial house? The question hung between them. Did she? Teaching the Whitmore children had been the first thing Evelyn had done that felt real. The first work that mattered. She loved those children, loved watching them learn and grow and discover who they could be. But she'd also discovered she could fight, could speak up, could change things. Maybe she didn't have to choose. I want to stay, Evelyn said slowly, but I also want to do more. The Ladies' Reform Circle, the women who wrote letters, they're organizing something, a movement for legal reform. They want women involved who've lived through these systems. They want you involved. Yes. Then do both. Mrs. Whitmore's smile was warm. Teach during the day, organize in the evenings. Show everyone that women don't have to choose between personal life and public purpose. We can do both. Is that possible? I don't know, but we could find out. That evening, the Whitmore family gathered for dinner. Evelyn included, sitting in her usual seat. The children chattered about their day, Mr. Whitmore discussed business, Mrs. Whitmore planned next week's menus. Normal life. Ordinary moments. But Evelyn felt the difference. She wasn't sitting there because she had nowhere else to go. She was there because she chose to be. After dinner, she excused herself and went to the small desk in her room, pulled out paper and pen, started writing a letter to the Ladies' Reform Circle. Dear friends, I accept your invitation to join your work, not because I consider myself exceptional, but because I believe ordinary women deserve extraordinary options. We have been told our entire lives to be quiet, convenient, suitable. I propose we be loud, difficult, and entirely ourselves instead. I will continue teaching because education matters, but I will also fight because justice matters, and I will speak because silence has cost us too much. Thank you for seeing me, for believing this fight matters, for proving that women supporting women can change the world. Let's begin. She sealed the letter, set it aside to be posted tomorrow. Outside her window, snow fell steadily, covering the garden in clean white silence. A new season beginning. Evelyn thought about Edmund, wondered briefly if he regretted pursuing the lawsuit. Probably not. Men like him didn't tend toward self-reflection. But she didn't need his regret. She'd never needed anything from him except to be left alone. And now she was. Free. Working. Fighting for something that mattered. It wasn't the life she'd been raised for. It was better. 3 days later, a final letter arrived. This one from someone unexpected. Caroline, her younger sister. Evelyn opened it with trembling hands. Dearest Evelyn, I'm sorry it's taken me so long to write. I was angry when you left. Hurt. I thought you were selfish, running away from responsibilities while the rest of us dealt with the consequences. But I read your letters in the newspapers. I followed the lawsuit. I watched you fight. And I realized something. You weren't running from responsibility. You were running toward yourself. Mother says I shouldn't write to you, that associating with you damages my prospects. But Father read the Dowager's letter and he cried. Actually cried. He said he was sorry, that he never understood what he'd done to you. I don't know if that matters to you. Maybe it's too late. But I wanted you to know. I'm proud of you. I'm proud to be your sister. And when I'm old enough to make my own choices, I want to be brave like you were. Don't marry unless you want to. Don't disappear unless you choose to. Don't let anyone tell you that convenience is the same as happiness. I love you. Carolyn Evelyn. Evelyn read the letter twice, tears streaming down her face. She'd thought leaving meant losing her family forever. And maybe she had lost the family she'd grown up in, the one built on duty and appearances and maintaining order. But maybe she'd gained something better. A sister who understood. A father learning regret. A mother who might someday see beyond society's rules. And beyond that, a whole network of women who'd found each other through shared struggle, who were building something new. That evening, Evelyn returned to the schoolroom. The children were waiting, Thomas bouncing with excitement, Margaret smiling shyly, Elizabeth pretending to be too mature for enthusiasm, but clearly thrilled. Miss Carter, Thomas launched himself at her. Did you win? Did you beat the Duke? I survived him. That's better than winning. Can we learn about lawsuits? Elizabeth asked immediately. How they work, what the process is. Elizabeth, that's morbid, Margaret protested. It's practical. What if I need to sue someone someday? Why would you need to? Girls, Evelyn interrupted gently. We can learn about legal systems, but first, I think we should talk about something more important. 3 faces looked at her expectantly. I want to talk about choices, about the difference between doing what you're told and doing what you believe is right, about when rules should be followed and when they should be questioned. Is this about you leaving? Thomas asked. Yes. And about why I came back, and about what happens when you decide your life matters more than other people's convenience. Elizabeth leaned forward. Tell us everything. So Evelyn did. Not the court details or legal arguments, but the real story. About overhearing Edmund, about the choice to leave, about being terrified and doing it anyway. About learning that being brave doesn't mean being unafraid, it means being afraid and acting regardless. So you were scared the whole time? Margaret asked. Absolutely terrified. But you did it anyway. I did it anyway. Thomas considered this. I'm scared of lots of things. Does that mean I'm brave when I do them anyway? It means you could be, if you choose to be. I'm going to be so brave, Thomas announced. I'm going to do all the scary things. Maybe start with something smaller than fleeing a duke, Evelyn suggested, smiling. That night, lying in her small room with moonlight streaming through the window, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not perfect contentment. There was still too much work to do, too many fights ahead. The Ladies' Reform Circle had plans, legal challenges, campaigns for change, but peace in knowing she'd chosen this, every piece of it. She'd walked away from a duchess's crown and built something better with her bare hands. She'd stood up to power and discovered her own. And tomorrow she'd wake up and keep building, keep teaching, keep fighting. Because this was her life now. Not suitable, not convenient, but entirely, unmistakably hers. Spring arrived slowly that year, winter reluctant to release its grip. But by March, green shoots pushed through the last patches of snow, and the world felt like it was waking up. Evelyn had been working with the Ladies' Reform Circle for 3 months. Evenings after lessons, she'd sit at the desk in her room writing letters, organizing petitions, corresponding with women across the country who wanted change. The work was slow, frustrating, often invisible, but it mattered. They were drafting legislation, a proposal that would require both parties to sign marriage contracts, not just fathers acting on behalf of daughters. It was modest, almost laughably small compared to the full scope of reform needed. But it was something. Baby steps, Mrs. Ashford had said during their last meeting. We changed the law one sentence at a time. The proposal was scheduled to be presented to Parliament in June. No one expected it to pass. Not this year, maybe not for a decade, but getting it on the record mattered. Making legislators say out loud whether they believed women deserved consent mattered. Evelyn was reviewing the latest draft when Elizabeth burst into the schoolroom, breathless. Miss Carter, there's someone here to see you. Who? A man. He says it's urgent. Elizabeth's eyes were wide. He looks important. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Had Edmund changed his mind? Was he pursuing the lawsuit again? She followed Elizabeth downstairs where Mrs. Whitmore stood in the foyer with a man Evelyn didn't recognize. He was maybe 30, dressed well but not ostentatiously, with an earnest face and ink-stained fingers. Miss Carter, he stepped forward, offering his hand. My name is David Price. I'm a journalist with the London Chronicle. I've been following your story. Most of the country has been following my story, Evelyn said carefully. What do you want? An interview. A proper one. He pulled out a folded newspaper. I've been writing pieces about women's legal rights. Your case has become a touchstone for the entire debate. I'd like to tell the full story, not just the scandal, but what you're building now. The work you're doing with the Reform Circle. Why? Because most people think your story ended when the Duke dropped the lawsuit. They think you won, and that's that. But you're still fighting. That's the story that matters. Mrs. Whitmore caught Evelyn's eye, raising an eyebrow in question. Evelyn thought about it. Another article meant more publicity, more scrutiny, but it also meant a platform, a way to reach people who still didn't understand that this fight wasn't over. All right, but I have conditions. David Price smiled. I expected nothing less. They talked for 2 hours. Evelyn laid out everything, the work with the Reform Circle, the proposed legislation, the network of women organizing across the country. She explained that her story wasn't exceptional. It was common. Thousands of women faced similar situations, but most couldn't leave because they lacked resources or support. What we're building, Evelyn said, is infrastructure. So the next woman who wants to leave has somewhere to go. So the next woman who wants to fight has backing. That's ambitious. It's necessary. David took notes steadily, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Unlike other journalists Evelyn had dealt with, he didn't seem interested in sensationalizing. He wanted facts, context, the machinery beneath the drama. One more question, he said as they finished. Do you regret leaving? Knowing everything that's happened since the lawsuit, the publicity, the cost to your family. Would you make the same choice? Evelyn didn't hesitate. Yes. Even though it was harder than you expected. Especially because it was harder. Easy things don't teach you who you are. The article ran 2 weeks later, front page, with a sketch of Evelyn that made her look more heroic than she felt. The headline read, After the Scandal, One Woman's Fight to Change the System That Failed Her. David Price had done his research. He'd interviewed Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Ashford, several members of the Ladies' Reform Circle. He'd documented the proposed legislation, explained its significance, and contextualized Evelyn's personal story within the broader fight for women's rights. It was thorough, thoughtful, and devastatingly effective. Within days, Evelyn received letters from women asking how to join the Reform Circle. From men, surprisingly, who said the article had made them question assumptions they'd never examined. From lawyers offering pro bono work on future cases. The movement was growing, but growth brought complications. In late April, Evelyn received a letter that made her hand shake. It was from her mother. Evelyn, I have read the articles. All of them. Your father and I have discussed at length what you've been doing, what you've become. I will not pretend I understand. I was raised to believe that a woman's greatest achievement was a good marriage, that duty and propriety mattered above all. You have rejected everything I taught you, and for months I considered that a personal failure. But your sister showed me Caroline's letters, the ones you've been writing to her, encouraging her to pursue education, to question, to choose. Caroline wants to attend university. A university, Evelyn, for women. She says you told her she was smart enough, that her mind mattered as much as her face or her family connections. I told her it was impossible, that no one would marry an educated woman, that she'd be ruining her prospects. She looked at me and said, if that's true, then the prospects aren't worth having. She sounded exactly like you. I don't know if you've saved her or ruined her. I don't know if what you're doing is brave or foolish. But I'm beginning to understand that the world I prepared you for no longer exists. Or perhaps it never should have. Your father asks that you visit when you're able. He wishes to apologize properly. I cannot promise I will apologize, as I am not yet certain I was wrong. But I can promise I will listen. Your mother Evelyn read it 3 times, tears blurring the ink. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't full acceptance, but it was a door opening, just slightly. She showed the letter to Mrs. Whitmore over breakfast. Will you go? I don't know. What if it's awful? What if they've changed? Mrs. Whitmore countered. What if your father genuinely wants to make amends? What if your mother is trying, in her limited way, to understand? What if they haven't? What if this is just another way to pressure me into being who they want? Then you leave. Again. You've done it before. Mrs. Whitmore squeezed her hand. But you'll never know unless you try. Evelyn went on a Saturday in early May. She took the morning coach to her family's estate, her stomach churning the entire journey. The estate looked smaller than she remembered, less imposing. The gardens needed work, and paint peeled from the shutters. The lawsuit might have been dropped, but clearly the threat of it had done financial damage anyway. Her father answered the door himself. No butler, no servants visible. He looked older, grayer, diminished. Evelyn, his voice cracked. Thank you for coming. They stood awkwardly in the foyer until her mother appeared, Caroline trailing behind her. Caroline broke the stalemate by running forward and throwing her arms around Evelyn. You came. You actually came. Of course I came. Mother said you wouldn't, that you'd be too angry. Evelyn looked over Caroline's head at her mother, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. Perhaps we should sit, her father said. I've asked Cook to prepare tea. They settled in the drawing room, the same room where Evelyn had been told about her engagement to Edmund, what felt like a lifetime ago. The same chairs, same wallpaper, same windows overlooking the garden, but everything felt different. Her father cleared his throat. I owe you an apology. A real one, not the inadequate thing I wrote in that first letter. You don't have to. I do. Please let me finish. He twisted his hands together. I signed that contract because I thought I was securing your future. We had debts, bad investments. I was desperate. Edmund offered a solution, marry you to him, and he'd cover our obligations. I told myself it was for the family, for your security. But it wasn't, Evelyn said quietly. No, it was for my pride, for my fear of losing status. I sold you to solve my problems, and I convinced myself I was doing you a favor. He looked directly at her, eyes red. When you left, I was furious. Not because I was worried about you, but because you'd embarrassed me. Made me look weak. Father, let me finish, please. He took a shaky breath. The lawsuit. Pursuing you. I supported it. Told Edmund he was right to demand compensation. I actually believed you owed us for the trouble you'd caused. The admission hung heavy in the room. And then I read the articles, he continued. Saw what you'd been through. Realized that my daughter, my own daughter, had been so desperate to escape that she'd fled with nothing, started over from nothing, and thrived. I didn't thrive. I survived. You did more than survive. You built something. You're fighting for something that matters. His voice broke. And I nearly destroyed you for it. I am so, so sorry. The apology didn't erase anything, didn't fix the contract or the engagement or the months of fear and struggle, but it was real, and it mattered. I forgive you, Evelyn said finally, not because you deserve it, but because I'm tired of carrying anger. Her mother, silent until now, spoke up. I cannot apologize. Not yet. I still believe in duty, in proper behavior, in the way things should be done. Mother, Caroline protested. But, her mother continued, I am beginning to understand that my way is not the only way, that perhaps what I was taught was incomplete. She looked at Evelyn directly. You terrify me. The choices you've made, the life you're living, it's everything I was raised to prevent. But Caroline idolizes you. She wants to be like you. And I find I cannot condemn that without condemning her. It wasn't much, but from her mother, it was something. Caroline tells me you've been writing to her, Evelyn said, encouraging her education. She's applied to Bedford College. For women. Her mother's tone suggested this was akin to announcing plans to join the circus. She wants to study mathematics. I'm good at it, Caroline said defensively. Miss Carter's letters taught me I could be good at things besides watercolors and piano. You're brilliant at it, Evelyn corrected, and you should go, if they accept you. They will. They have to. Caroline's certainty was beautiful. Because I'm not spending my life being decorative. I want to think, to work, to matter. Her mother closed her eyes. This is my fault. I raised her to believe security was everything, but you showed her something different. I showed her she had choices. And now she's choosing things that will make her life difficult. So did I, Evelyn pointed out. And I'm happy. Are you? Her mother challenged. Truly? You work as a governess. You'll never marry, never have your own home, never have the security of, I have work that matters, friends who value me, a life I chose. That's security. Just not the kind you recognize. The words settled between them, not resolving anything, but laying it out clearly. Her mother stood abruptly. I need air, excuse me. She left. Caroline started to follow, but her father stopped her. Let her go, she needs time to process. She'll never accept it, Caroline said. Maybe not, but she's trying. That's progress. He turned to Evelyn. Will you stay for dinner? I should get back. The children, please, just one meal. Let us... He paused. Let us see who you've become. Dinner was strange and stilted and occasionally wonderful. Caroline dominated the conversation, asking about the ladies' reform circle, about the proposed legislation, about everything Evelyn had been doing. Their father listened, asked questions, seemed genuinely interested. Their mother stayed mostly silent, but she didn't leave, didn't protest, just sat and absorbed, her expression unreadable. As Evelyn prepared to leave, her father pressed an envelope into her hands. What's this? Money. Not much. Maybe 200 pounds. Whatever I can spare from what's left. He held up a hand as she started to protest. Not charity, repayment. You left with your grandmother's money and nothing else. This is what I should have given you when you needed it. Father, I can't. You can. Use it for your work, for helping other women leave bad situations. Make it matter. His smile was sad. Let me do one thing right. Caroline hugged her fiercely at the door. Come back, please. I want to hear everything, every detail of what you're doing. I will. I promise. And Evelyn? Caroline pulled back, her eyes serious. Thank you for showing me I could be more than pretty, that I could be smart and difficult and completely myself. You were always those things. I just told you it was allowed. On the coach ride back, Evelyn counted the money her father had given her. 230 pounds, actually. Not a fortune, but substantial. Enough to help 3 or 4 women leave bad situations. Enough to fund travel, temporary housing, fresh starts. The reform circle would know how to use it. June arrived with this proposal headed to Parliament. No one expected it to pass. Several members of the reform circle had been blunt about that. But getting it on record mattered. Making legislators debate whether women deserved consent in marriage contracts mattered. The day of the vote, Evelyn traveled to London with Mrs. Ashford and 3 other reform circle members. They sat in the gallery, watching men in wigs and formal robes debate whether women were people deserving of choice. Most of the speeches were predictable. Tradition. Order. The sanctity of family structure. Women were too emotional to make such decisions. Fathers knew best. But then someone unexpected stood, Lord Pemberton, an older aristocrat known for moderate views. I have listened to my colleagues speak of tradition and order, but I must ask, whose tradition? Whose order? He gestured to the gallery where Evelyn and the others sat. These women are not asking for radical upheaval. They are asking for consent. The same consent we require for business contracts, property transfers, and every other legal agreement. Are we truly arguing that women are less deserving of self-determination than a piece of land? The chamber stirred. Uncomfortable shifting. I have 3 daughters, Lord Pemberton continued, and until recently, I believed my duty was to arrange suitable marriages for them, to protect them through advantageous connections. But I read Miss Carter's account, I'm sure many of you did, and I was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. I was not protecting my daughters. I was selling them. Someone shouted that he was being dramatic. Lord Pemberton ignored it. This proposal is modest. It requires both parties to sign marriage contracts. That is all. It does not eliminate arranged marriages. It does not destroy family structures. It simply ensures that women have a voice in their own futures. If we cannot support even this small measure, then we are not lawmakers. We are architects of oppression. He sat down. Silence followed. The vote was called. The proposal failed. Of course it did. 40 votes in favor, 80 against. But as they filed out of the gallery, Evelyn felt something shift. 40 votes. 40 men who'd been willing to say women deserved consent. It wasn't victory, but it wasn't total defeat either. Progress at, Mrs. Ashford said, echoing Evelyn's thoughts. Painfully slow, but real. Outside Parliament, a crowd had gathered. Women, mostly, some who'd written letters of support, some who'd shared their own stories, some who'd simply heard about the vote and wanted to witness it. When they saw Evelyn, they started clapping. Not loud, not theatrical, just steady applause that spread through the crowd like a wave. Evelyn stood frozen, overwhelmed. One woman stepped forward, older, maybe 60, with work-worn hands. Thank you for fighting. My granddaughter is 16. Because of what you did, she knows she can say no. That matters. Another woman. I left my husband last year. The parish called me a sinner. My family disowned me. But I read about you, and I knew I wasn't alone. I found the Reform Circle. They helped me. I have work now. A life. More women shared stories, some long, some just a sentence or two, all of them variations on the same theme. You showed me I could choose. You made me believe I mattered. By the time Evelyn made it back to the inn where they were staying, she was exhausted and tearful and filled with something she couldn't quite name. Not satisfaction, the work was far from done. Not pride. She'd just been the visible one. Hundreds of women were doing this work invisibly. But purpose. Certainty that this fight, however difficult, was the right one. Mrs. Ashford found her sitting in the small room, staring out the window at London's evening streets. You all right? Those women today? They thanked me. But I didn't do anything special. I just left. You left publicly. You spoke when others couldn't. You stood when others were forced to kneel. Mrs. Ashford sat beside her. That's leadership, whether you wanted it or not. I don't feel like a leader. Good. The moment you do, you'll stop listening. She smiled. The vote today was just the beginning. We'll try again next year, and the year after that. Eventually we'll win. Not because of one dramatic moment, but because we refuse to stop trying. That sounds exhausting. It is, but you're already doing it. So welcome to the rest of your life. Evelyn returned to the Whitmore house 3 days later to find the children had made a banner. Welcome home, Miss Carter. Parliament's loss is our gain. Thomas launched into an explanation of the banner's construction. Margaret did the letters because she's good at drawing, but I helped hold it steady, while Elizabeth rolled her eyes and pretended not to care. But that evening, Elizabeth slipped into Evelyn's room as she was unpacking. Did you really talk to Parliament? I sat in the gallery. I didn't speak. But they were voting about your idea, about women signing contracts. It was lots of women's idea. I'm just the public face of it. Elizabeth considered this. I want to do that someday. Have ideas that matter, change things. You will. How do you know? Because you're already asking the right questions. That's how it starts. A month later, a letter arrived from an unexpected source. Evelyn almost didn't open it when she saw the return address. Thornhill Estate. But it wasn't from Edmund. It was from Mary, the housemaid who'd helped deliver the letter to the newspaper. Dear Miss Carter, I hope you don't mind me writing. I wanted you to know what happened after you left. The Duke dismissed half the staff. Said we were all disloyal, couldn't be trusted. I lost my position, but honestly, I'm grateful. Working there felt like drowning. I remembered what you said about finding a position that values you, so I did. I work for a family in York now. They're kind, they pay fair wages, and the mistress actually remembers our names. But the real reason I'm writing is to tell you what's being said at the estate. The Duke has been trying to find a new fiancée. 3 families have turned him down. Apparently word has spread about how he treats women, like furniture, as you once said. His reputation is ruined. The Dowager has moved to London. She's working with some women's charity, if you can believe it. I heard she told someone your letter opened her eyes to things she'd been ignoring her whole life. The estate is quieter now, emptier, like something died there. I thought you'd want to know. Not because it's victory. I know you don't need that, but because what you did mattered. You didn't just save yourself, you changed things. Thank you for seeing me, for treating me like a person instead of furniture too. Yours sincerely, Mary Fletcher. Evelyn folded the letter carefully, added it to the box where she kept important correspondence. Edmund's downfall wasn't something to celebrate. She didn't want him destroyed, just stopped. But knowing he faced consequences, that his behavior had finally cost him something beyond money or pride, that felt like justice. That autumn, Caroline was accepted to Bedford College. Her letter announcing it was 3 pages of barely contained excitement. They accepted me! Can you believe it? I'll be studying mathematics, living in London, thinking professionally about numbers. Mother is devastated, father is confused but supportive, and I couldn't be happier. I'll be starting in January. Will you visit? I want you to see what you made possible. Evelyn did visit, in February, after Caroline had settled into college life. She found her sister in a small but tidy room, surrounded by books and papers, looking more alive than Evelyn had ever seen her. It's hard, Caroline admitted. The work is difficult. Some of the professors don't take us seriously, and the other students, the men, make jokes about women wasting education. But I'm learning, really learning, using my mind for something beyond planning menus and embroidering pillowcases. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you. You showed me this was possible. Caroline grabbed her hands. I'm going to graduate, and then I'm going to teach. Help other girls see that they can think, that their minds matter. Because of you, that's possible for me. Later, as Evelyn walked through London's streets back to the inn, she thought about the ripples. She'd left one man trying to save herself, and that action had spread outward. Caroline pursuing education, Mary finding better work, the reform circle growing, legislation being debated, women across the country realizing they could say no. One choice. That's all it had been. One moment of deciding that her life mattered more than convenience, and it had changed everything. 2 years after leaving Edmund, Evelyn stood in the Whitmore garden watching the children play. Elizabeth was 14 now, sharp and brilliant, and headed for boarding school in the fall because she'd outgrown what Evelyn could teach her. Margaret had discovered a love of botany and was growing an elaborate garden. Thomas, at 7, still asked 400 questions a day. Mrs. Whitmore joined her, 2 cups of tea in hand. You've been quiet today. Just thinking. About? How strange life is. 2 years ago, I was engaged to a duke. I was supposed to be planning a wedding, preparing for a life of silent service. Instead, I'm here. Teaching children who actually see me. Working for change that might not happen in my lifetime. Living a life no one expected. Do you miss it, the life you left? Evelyn didn't even have to think. No, not even slightly. Not even the security, the status? I have security, just not the kind that comes from a man deciding I'm valuable. She gestured to the house, the garden, the children. This is security. Work that matters. People who care. A life I built. You've done more than build a life. You've built a movement. I've contributed to a movement. There's a difference. Mrs. Whitmore smiled. Always so careful to share credit. Because it's true. I was visible, but I wasn't alone. None of this would have worked if other women hadn't helped, supported, fought alongside me. They stood in comfortable silence, watching evening settle over the garden. I have something to tell you, Mrs. Whitmore said finally. We're moving to London. Evelyn's heart sank. When? Next spring. My husband's been offered a position there, better pay. more opportunities for the children's education. She paused. We want you to come with us. To London? As a governess, yes, but also as more than that. The Reform Circle's main office is in London. You'd be closer to the work. You could do more, reach further. I don't know. This house, this village, it's been home. Home is what you make it. And you make home by choosing, remember? So choose. Mrs. Whitmore's expression was gentle. What do you want, Evelyn? Not what you should want, what you actually want. Evelyn thought about it. Staying here would be safe, familiar, but the work she wanted to do, the changes she wanted to see, those were in London. Parliament was in London. The newspapers were in London. The center of power was in London. If she wanted to keep fighting, she needed to be where the fight was. I'll come, she said, but only if I can keep teaching the children. That's not negotiable. Wouldn't dream of separating you from them. The move happened in April. Evelyn packed her few belongings, more than she'd had 2 years ago, but still not much, and traveled with the Whitmore family to a new house in a new city. London was overwhelming, loud, crowded, dirty, alive with possibility. The Whitmore's house was in a decent neighborhood, close to parks and schools, and, importantly, the Reform Circle's office. Evelyn settled into new rhythms. Morning lessons with the children. Afternoons at the Reform Circle office, organizing, writing, planning. Evenings sometimes at lectures or meetings, sometimes simply reading in her room. It was busy, demanding, occasionally exhausting. It was also exactly what she wanted. One evening in July, Evelyn was working at the Reform Circle office when Mrs. Ashford burst in, waving a newspaper. You need to see this, now. Evelyn took the paper. Front page headline, Marriage Reform Bill passes second reading in Parliament. She read it twice, not quite believing. It passed? Second reading, yes. Still needs the final vote, but Mrs. Ashford was nearly crying with excitement. Evelyn, it's happening. The bill requiring both parties to sign marriage contracts. It's actually happening. When's the final vote? 2 weeks. And they're saying it has a real chance. The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity. The Reform Circle mobilized, writing letters, organizing rallies, ensuring every sympathetic member of Parliament knew that women were watching, waiting, demanding change. The day of the final vote, Evelyn sat again in the gallery. This time, the crowd was larger. More women, more attention, more at stake. The debate lasted hours. Arguments for and against, some thoughtful, some insulting, all intensely focused on one question. Did women deserve a voice in their own marriages? When the vote was finally called, Evelyn held her breath. 52 in favor, 49 against. It passed. By 3 votes, the marriage reform bill passed. The gallery erupted, women crying, cheering, embracing. Below, some members of Parliament looked stunned, others angry. A few, like Lord Pemberton, who'd spoken in support, looked quietly satisfied. Evelyn sat frozen, overwhelmed. They'd won. Actually won. It wasn't everything. The law was modest, limited, a tiny step in a much longer journey. But it was real. And it mattered. Outside Parliament, reporters swarmed. Evelyn found herself surrounded by questions, demands for statements, requests for interviews. How does it feel to have won? One reporter asked. Evelyn thought about the question, about everything that had led here, leaving Edmund, surviving alone, building a life, fighting for change. It doesn't feel like winning, she said finally. It feels like beginning, like we've finally opened a door that's been locked for centuries. Now comes the hard part, walking through it. What's next for you? More work, more fights. This bill is one sentence in a much larger story. Women still can't vote, can't own property in marriage, can't access most professions. We've won one battle. The war continues. Do you have any message for the Duke of Thornhill? Evelyn paused. She could be gracious, diplomatic, politic, but she'd spent too many years being careful. I hope he's learned that women are people, not property. But honestly, I don't think about him anymore. He's irrelevant to my life. That's the greatest victory of all. That evening, back at the Whitmore house, the family celebrated with champagne and cake. The children were allowed to stay up late, and Thomas insisted on making a toast. To Miss Carter, he said, raising his glass of water seriously, who taught us that rules can be wrong and breaking them can be right. That's not exactly what Evelyn started. No, he's right, Elizabeth interrupted. You taught us to question, to think, to choose. That's better than any Latin grammar. I like Latin grammar, Margaret protested, but she was smiling. Later, After the children were in bed, Evelyn stood at the window of her room, looking out at London's night sky. Somewhere out there, other women were reading about the vote. Some celebrating, some skeptical, some just beginning to realize that change was possible. She thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, frightened, uncertain, desperate. That woman had walked away with nothing and no plan, trusting only that anything was better than disappearing. She'd been right. Evelyn pulled out Mrs. Whitmore's journal, nearly full now, with 2 years of documentation. On the last blank page, she wrote, "Today, Parliament passed the marriage reform bill. Women must now consent to their own marriages. It's a small law, but it represents something larger, the beginning of recognition that we are people deserving of choice. I didn't do this alone. Hundreds of women fought for this. Some visible, most invisible. Some privileged, many struggling. Together, we changed something. I don't know what comes next. More battles, certainly. More resistance, more slow, painful progress. But I know who I am now. Not someone's fiancé, not someone's property, not suitable or convenient or decorative. I am Evelyn Carter. I teach children. I fight for justice. I choose my own life. And that, finally, completely, is enough." She closed the journal, set it on the shelf beside the small wooden box that had once held her grandmother's money. Empty now, but still important. A reminder of where she'd started. Tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges, new women seeking help, new laws needing changing, new battles requiring fighters. But tonight, Evelyn stood in her small room in a house she'd chosen, surrounded by people who valued her, doing work that mattered. She'd left an estate to find herself, and in doing so, she'd helped others find themselves too. Years later, people would ask when she'd known she was free. They expected a dramatic answer, the moment the lawsuit was dropped, or when the bill passed, or some other clear dividing line between captivity and liberation. But Evelyn would always say the same thing. She'd been free the moment she walked out that door in the dark, carrying nothing but resolve. Everything after was just learning to live like she meant it.